The Ghost of Yankee Jim. The concept of haunted houses has deep roots in human history, with tales of ghostly apparitions and restless spirits appearing across cultures and centuries. These stories often stem from folklore, where homes or buildings are perceived as being inhabited by the disembodied spirits of the deceased. The origins of the haunted house, as a popular cultural phenomenon, can be traced back to 19th century London, when illusions and attractions introduced the public to gruesome and spine-chilling experiences. However, the idea of a place being haunted is far older. For instance, Roman writer Pliny the Younger is credited with one of the earliest known haunted house stories, describing a villa plagued by eerie noises and spectral figures. In many cases, haunted houses are tied to their previous occupants, people whose lives ended tragically or were marked by intense emotions such as anger, despair, or betrayal. This connection between past events and present hauntings is explored in various accounts. For example, some believe that unsavory activities like drinking, gambling, and even darker deeds committed within a home could leave an indelible mark on its atmosphere. Similarly, violent deaths or unresolved conflicts might explain why certain locations become focal points for paranormal activity. One notable case involves murals in Jackson Square, where patrons have reported encounters with what they believe to be the spirit of former owners or patrons from the late 1800s and early 1900s. It suggested these spirits may still linger due to unfinished business or strong emotional ties to the property. These historical narratives not only enrich our understanding of haunted houses, but also highlight how deeply intertwined they are with human experiences and emotions. Whether through ancient folklore or modern-day retellings, the haunting presence of those who came before continues to captivate and terrify us alike. Would you like more specific details about any particular haunted location story? Let's read the story together. As I sat at my desk, staring at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen, a strange chill crept up my spine. It was late at night, and the room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan above me. I had been trying to write a story about haunted places, but inspiration felt distant, until I remembered the Whaley House. The moment I began typing its name, it was as though something had shifted in the air around me. The Whaley House, located in San Diego, California, is considered one of the most haunted houses in America. Built in 1856 by Thomas Whaley, a prominent merchant and civic leader, the house has long been infamous for its reported paranormal activity. Visitors have claimed to see ghostly figures, hear disembodied voices, and experience strange noises that cannot be explained. One of the most well-known spirits said to haunt the house belongs to James Yankee Jim Robinson, a man who was executed on the property before the house was ever constructed. I had always been fascinated by stories of ghosts, but I never imagined I would find myself drawn so deeply into one. My fascination turned into obsession when I decided to visit the Whaley House myself. At first, I thought it would simply make good research material. Little did I know it would become an experience I could never forget. It all started when I booked a tour of the Whaley House during a weekend trip to San Diego. As I approached the building, I felt an immediate sense of unease. The house stood tall, its brick walls weathered by time, and its windows seemed to stare back at me like hollow eyes. There was something oppressive about the atmosphere, a heaviness in the air that made it hard to breathe. Inside, our guide led us through narrow hallways lined with antique furniture and faded portraits. She spoke in hushed tones about the history of the house, recounting tales of tragedy and loss. According to her, many members of the Whaley family had met their demise within those very walls. But it was the story of Yankee Jim that stuck with me the most. James Robinson, known as Yankee Jim, was accused of stealing a boat and sentenced to death by hanging. His execution took place on the exact spot where the Whaley House now stands. Legend says his spirit remains trapped there, unable to move on due to the injustice of his fate. Tourists often report hearing heavy footsteps and feeling an icy presence near the area where he died. At the end of the tour, I lingered behind while others left. Something compelled me to stay to explore further. Perhaps it was curiosity, or maybe it was something darker calling out to me. Either way, I found myself alone in the dimly lit parlor, surrounded by shadows that danced along the walls. As I wandered deeper into the house, the temperature dropped suddenly. Goosebumps rose on my arms and my breath came out in visible puffs. I told myself it was just the old heating system acting up, but deep down I knew better. This was not normal. In the dining room, I noticed a faint scratching sound coming from the corner. It reminded me of nails dragging across wood. Slowly, I turned toward the noise, my heart pounding wildly in my chest. At first I saw nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement, a shadow flickering against the wall. It wasn't cast by any light source I could see. Instead, it moved independently, twisting and contorting into shapes too grotesque to describe. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" There was no response, only silence. Or so I thought. Moments later I heard it, a low, guttural laugh that echoed through the empty halls. It sounded human yet distorted, as if coming from somewhere far away. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to remain calm. I needed answers. I followed the sound, each step creaking loudly beneath my feet. The laughter grew louder, more menacing, until I reached a closed door at the end of the hallway. Hesitating for only a second, I pushed it open. Inside was a small bedroom, its furniture covered in white sheets. In the center of the room stood a figure, a tall man dressed in tattered clothing, his face obscured by darkness. "You shouldn't be here," he rasped, his voice cold and hollow. Before I could respond, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, fumbling for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Trapped, I turned back to face the man, only to find him gone. The room was empty, save for the overwhelming sense of dread pressing down on me. Somehow I managed to break free from the room. Whether the door unlocked itself or I somehow will it open, I will never know. All I remember is running faster than I ever had in my life. I burst out of the house and didn't stop until I reached my car, parked several blocks away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the shadowy figure standing over me, whispering words I couldn't understand. Days passed, and the memory refused to fade. I became obsessed with learning everything I could about Yankee Jim and the Whaley house. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. According to local records, Thomas Whaley himself had reported hearing strange noises shortly after moving into the house. He described them as heavy footsteps pacing back and forth, echoing through the halls at night. Over the years, countless visitors have shared similar experiences, claiming to feel watched or even touched by unseen hands. Though I have returned home, the events of that night continue to haunt me. Sometimes, when I sit alone at my desk, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of footsteps trailing behind me. And whenever I pass by a mirror, I half expect to see a shadowy figure standing just over my shoulder. Because deep down, I know, one wrong decision, one careless moment, and everything can change in an instant. Night shift. Michael Carter thought landing a customer service job at TechLink Solutions in downtown Seattle would be his fresh start. After his messy divorce and mounting debts, the night shift position seemed like a blessing. Better pay, fewer distractions, and a chance to rebuild his life. The modern office building gleamed with promise, its glass walls reflecting the city lights like a beacon of hope. But some buildings hold secrets darker than their shadows. TechLink Solutions occupied the 15th floor of what locals whispered was cursed ground. Decades earlier, the site housed the abandoned Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, where experimental treatments pushed patients beyond the edge of sanity. When the hospital was demolished in the 1980s, developers buried its history beneath steel and concrete, hoping to erase the screams that once echoed through its halls. Now those screams have found new voices. I never believed in fresh starts until I needed one desperately. Standing in the lobby of the TechLink Solutions building at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, I felt like I was finally getting my life back on track. The divorce papers were signed, the debt collectors had stopped calling, and I had a job that paid enough to keep me afloat. The night shift customer service wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. The building stretched 30 floors into the Seattle skyline, all glass and steel reaching towards stars I couldn't see through the fog. Inside, the marble floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lighting, creating an almost mirror-like effect that made me feel like I was walking through water. Everything smelled like industrial cleaner and something else I couldn't place. Something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. "You must be Michael Carter," said a voice behind me. I turned to see a woman in her 30s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that looked practiced. "I'm Rebecca from HR. Ready for your first night?" She led me to the elevators, her heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that seemed to echo longer than it should. As we rode up to the 15th floor, I noticed the temperature dropping with each floor we passed. By the time we reached 15, I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air. "Building's climate control has been acting up lately," Rebecca said, but she wasn't shivering like I was. "You'll get used to it." The 15th floor was a maze of gray cubicles arranged in perfect rows, like a cemetery of corporate dreams. Most were empty. The day shift had gone home hours ago, but scattered throughout, I could see the blue glow of computer screens where night shift workers sat hunched over their keyboards. The overhead lights flickered occasionally, casting dancing shadows that made the whole place feel alive and restless. "Your workstation is right here," Rebecca said, stopping at a cubicle near the center of the floor. "And this is Sarah Martinez, one of our top performers. She can show you the ropes." Sarah looked up from her computer, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. She was beautiful in an unsettling way, pale skin that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights, dark hair that fell in perfect waves, and eyes that were too knowing for someone who looked barely 25. When she smiled, her teeth were perfectly white, but the expression never reached her eyes. "Welcome to the team, Michael," she said, extending a hand that felt ice cold even in the chilled office. "I think you're going to fit in perfectly here." Rebecca left us alone, and Sarah began explaining the customer service software. Her voice was melodic, almost hypnotic, but I found myself struggling to concentrate on her words. Every few minutes, the lights would flicker, and in those brief moments of darkness, I could swear I saw movement in my peripheral vision, shapes that shouldn't have been there. "The calls can get intense," Sarah was saying. "Some customers are dealing with difficult situations. You'll learn to handle them with patience and understanding." "What kind of difficult situations?" I asked. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. "People in crisis, people who've lost things, people looking for closure." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, they seemed to reflect more than just the computer screen's glow. Sometimes they call because they don't have anywhere else to turn. Around 2 a.m. I met Jake, the night security guard. He was a weathered man in his 60s, with gray hair and hands that shook slightly when he wasn't holding his coffee cup. He found me during my break, standing by the windows looking out at the city lights. "First night?" he asked, joining me at the window. "Yeah, still getting used to it." He was quiet for a long moment, then said, "This building? It's got history. Bad history." I looked at him sideways. "What do you mean?" "Before they built this place, there was a hospital here, Riverside Psychiatric Hospital, closed down in the 80s after." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "After some real bad things happened to the patients." The way he said it made my skin crawl. "What kind of bad things?" Jake glanced around as if making sure we were alone. "Experimental treatments. Doctor named Blackwood was doing things. Things that weren't exactly medical, if you know what I mean. When the state shut them down, they bulldozed the whole place and tried to bury the past along with it." "And you think that affects this building somehow?" He turned to look at me directly, his watery blue eyes serious. "I've been working security here for 12 years, kid. I've seen things that don't belong, heard things that shouldn't exist, and I've watched good people change after working here too long." He gestured toward the office floor. "You seem like a decent guy, just Be careful who you trust and pay attention to what feels wrong." I was about to ask him what he meant when we heard it. Sarah's voice coming from her cubicle across the office. She was speaking in a low, urgent tone, almost pleading. But according to the schedule Rebecca had shown me, Sarah had left an hour ago. "That's impossible," I whispered. Jake just nodded grimly. "Like I said, kid, things that don't belong." We walked back toward the cubicles, our footsteps muffled by the industrial carpeting. The closer we got to Sarah's workstation, the clearer her voice became. She was talking to someone, having what sounded like an intense conversation about crossing over and finding peace. But as we approached her cubicle, I realized something that made my blood run cold. Her chair was empty. Her computer was on, the screen displaying what looked like a customer service chat interface, but there was no one sitting there. The voice was coming from the empty space where Sarah should have been. Jake grabbed my arm. "We should go," he whispered. But I couldn't move. I stepped closer to the cubicle, close enough to read the computer screen. The chat window showed an active conversation with a customer named Jennifer WW. The account number displayed was old, really old, from the late 1980s. As I watched, new messages appeared in the chat. "Sarah, I understand you're looking for closure, Jennifer. Tell me what happened that night." "Jennifer, the rain was so heavy, I couldn't see the road. Sarah, you have to help me find him. He's still out there waiting." "Sarah, I know, Jennifer. I know exactly where he is. But first you need to help me with something." I reached out to touch the keyboard, but Jake yanked me back. "Don't," he hissed. "Don't touch anything." That's when I noticed the temperature around Sarah's cubicle was at least 10 degrees colder than the rest of the office. My breath was forming visible clouds, and frost was beginning to form on the computer screen. The fluorescent light above her desk flickered once, twice, then went out completely. In the darkness, for just a split second, I could swear I saw the outline of someone sitting in Sarah's chair, a woman with long dark hair, typing furiously. But when the light flickered back on, the chair was empty again. The chat window was gone. The computer showed nothing but a blank desktop. Jake and I stood there in stunned silence, the only sound of our rapid breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Finally, Jake spoke. "The account number you saw, Jennifer W. from the 80s? I nodded, still staring at the empty chair. "Jennifer Walsh died in a car accident in 1987, right here on the land where this building stands. She was a patient at Riverside Hospital." He paused, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "And so was Sarah Martinez." The next few weeks at TechLink Solutions fell into a routine that should have been comforting, but somehow felt more like a slow descent into something I couldn't name. Sarah was there every night when I arrived, always perfectly put together, always smiling that practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had become my unofficial mentor, teaching me the intricacies of the customer service software and the peculiar ways of our nighttime clientele. But the more I watched her work, the more unsettled I became. Sarah handled more calls in a single shift than seemed humanly possible. While the rest of us managed maybe 15 to 20 calls per night, Sarah was averaging 60 to 70. Her call times were astronomical, sometimes lasting over 2 hours, yet management never questioned her productivity. In fact, they seemed to worship her. "Sarah's our star performer," Rebecca told me during my 2-week review. 3 months running as Employee of the Month. We're lucky to have someone with her. Unique talents. The way she said unique talents made something crawl up my spine. I started paying closer attention to Sarah's calls. Her voice would change during conversations, not just in tone, but in accent, in age, in personality. Sometimes she sounded like a young child, other times like an elderly woman. She would speak in languages I was certain she didn't know, fragments of what sounded like Latin, sometimes Russian, occasionally something that didn't sound like any earthly language at all. "The customers come from all backgrounds," she explained when I asked about the different languages. "You learn to adapt." But there was something else. During her longest calls, Sarah would become physically agitated. She would rock back and forth in her chair, her hands moving as if she were reaching for something or someone just out of reach. Her facial expressions would shift rapidly, pleading one moment, angry the next, then desperately sad. Sometimes tears would stream down her cheeks while she maintained a perfectly professional telephone voice. "I understand your frustration," she would say calmly into her headset, while her face contorted with what looked like genuine anguish. "Let me see what I can do to help resolve this issue for you." The nocebo effect was something I'd learned about in college psychology, the power of negative expectation to create real physical symptoms. But what I was witnessing with Sarah seemed like the opposite, a kind of supernatural placebo where her belief in something unseen was manifesting in very real, very disturbing ways. One night in November, I decided to listen to one of her calls. The customer service software allowed supervisors to monitor conversations for quality assurance, and Sarah had shown me how to access the feature during my training. What I heard made me question everything I thought I knew about reality. Sarah was speaking to someone she called Mrs. Henderson, discussing what sounded like insurance claims for a house fire. But as I listened, the details became increasingly bizarre. "I understand the fire happened on Christmas Eve of 1962, Sarah was saying. "And you're concerned about your children's belongings that were lost?" The customer's voice was faint, crackling with static that shouldn't have existed on a digital phone system. "My babies. Their toys are still in there. I can hear them crying for their dolls." "I know, Mrs. Henderson. I can hear them too. But you need to understand, the fire was a long time ago. Your children, they're safe now." "No," the voice crackled. "No, they're still in the house, still burning, still crying for mommy." Sarah's professional composure began to crack. Her voice took on a pleading quality. "Mrs. Henderson, listen to me. You need to let them go. You need to move on." "I can't leave them. I won't leave them." The line went dead with a sound like breaking glass. Sarah immediately broke down sobbing, her whole body shaking with grief that seemed far too deep for a customer service call. When she finally looked up and saw me watching, her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "Sometimes," she whispered, "the calls get personal." I started researching TechLink solutions during my off hours, trying to understand what kind of company we really worked for. What I found was disturbing in its simplicity. TechLink barely existed. Their website was generic, their business registration recent, and their client list suspiciously vague. Yet somehow, they had enough revenue to occupy an entire floor of one of Seattle's most expensive buildings and pay their employees well above market rate. The pieces weren't adding up, and the more questions I asked, the more evasive everyone became. I also started having dreams about the old Riverside Hospital. In these dreams, I would walk through endless corridors lined with doors that opened to reveal rooms full of people talking on telephones. But these weren't modern phones. They were old rotary models, black and heavy, and the people holding them were dressed in hospital gowns from decades past. In every dream, I would eventually find a room where a woman in a white coat was taking notes, while patients spoke into phones that weren't connected to anything. The woman had salt and pepper hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She would look up from her clipboard and smile at me with the same practiced expression I'd seen on Rebecca's face. "Ah, Michael," she would say. "Right on schedule. Your mother spoke very highly of you." I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. The dreams felt more real than my waking hours, and I began to dread sleep almost as much as I dreaded going to work. Sarah's behavior was becoming more erratic. She would arrive at work carrying small objects, a child's toy, an old photograph, a piece of jewelry, and place them carefully on her desk before beginning her shift. When I asked about them, she would say they were connection anchors to help her better understand her customers' needs. "Everyone needs something to hold on to," she explained, running her fingers over what looked like a tiny porcelain doll with cracked features. "Something that reminds them of who they were before." The doll's painted eyes seemed to follow me as I walked past her cubicle, and I could swear I heard it whisper my name when the office was quiet. But dolls don't whisper, and the rational part of my mind kept insisting that stress and sleep deprivation were playing tricks on me. Yet the evidence kept mounting that something fundamentally wrong was happening at TechLink Solutions. Other employees exhibited similar patterns to Sarah: extraordinary productivity, emotional volatility, and an unsettling disconnection from reality. Marcus Thompson, who worked over 2 cubicles, claimed to have been with the company for 15 years, yet couldn't remember anything about his life before starting the job. "It's like I woke up one day, and I was here," he told me during a break. And that was fine with me. This place, it gives you purpose. It gives you a way to help people who really need it. But the people we were supposedly helping seemed less like customers and more like something else entirely. The voices on the phone carried a weight of desperation that felt ancient, and the problems they described were either decades old or impossible to solve by any conventional means. On my last night before the weekend, I witnessed something that finally convinced me that whatever was happening at TechLink Solutions went far beyond simple customer service. Sarah received a call that lasted nearly 3 hours. During that time, she spoke to what she claimed were 7 different people, but I could hear only her side of the conversation. "Yes, I understand you're all together now," she said at one point. "Yes, I know it's crowded in there, but you need to take turns. Michael needs to understand what's happening before he can help." My name. She had mentioned my name. I looked up from my workstation to find Sarah staring directly at me, the phone still pressed to her ear. Her eyes had changed. They were darker now, deeper, as if something else was looking out through them. "He's listening now," she said onto the phone, never breaking eye contact with me. "Would you like to speak with him directly?" Before I could protest, she was walking toward my desk, the phone cord stretching impossibly far behind her. She held out the handset with a smile that was equal parts invitation and threat. "They've been waiting to talk to you, Michael. They know all about your mother." My mother had died when I was 7. She had been treated for postpartum depression after my younger brother was stillborn, and had spent several months in a psychiatric facility before her death. I had never told anyone at TechLink about my family history. I reached for the phone with a hand that wasn't quite steady. The handset was ice cold against my ear, and for a moment I heard nothing but static. Then, cutting through the white noise like a blade, came a voice I hadn't heard in over 20 years. "Michael, my baby boy, I've been trying to reach you for so long." I dropped the phone like it was on fire, the handset clattering against my desk before Sarah calmly retrieved it. The voice I'd heard, my mother's voice, continued speaking from the fallen receiver. But the words were muffled now, distant, like someone calling from the bottom of a well. "I'm sorry," Sarah said into the phone, her eyes never leaving my face. "He's not ready yet, but soon. I promise you soon." She hung up and returned to her cubicle as if nothing had happened, leaving me sitting there with my hands shaking and my mind reeling. The rational part of me insisted it was impossible. Stress, sleep deprivation, maybe even some kind of elaborate hazing ritual for new employees. But the voice had been perfect, down to the slight lisp my mother had developed after her dental work when I was 6. Management called a meeting the next Monday. Rebecca gathered all the night shift employees in the conference room on the 16th floor, a space I'd never seen before. The room was circular, with windows that looked out over the city, but somehow the view seemed different from up here, darker, more distorted, as if we were looking at Seattle through dirty water. "We've been monitoring call quality and duration," Rebecca announced, her perfectly manicured hands folded on the table. "Some of our representatives are having exceptionally long conversations with clients. While we appreciate thoroughness, we need to maintain efficiency standards." She looked directly at Sarah, who sat perfectly still with that same practiced smile. "Sarah, your average call time last week was 123 minutes. That's unusual." "Some customers need more time," Sarah replied, her voice carrying an odd resonance in the circular room. "They have complex situations that require careful attention." What kind of situations? Asked James, another night shift worker who'd been with the company for 6 months. Sarah's smile widened, but her eyes remained cold. Family issues, lost connections, people trying to find closure with loved ones they can't reach anymore. Rebecca nodded as if this made perfect sense. Well, we've decided to implement a new quality assurance program. All calls will be recorded and reviewed to ensure we're providing the best possible service to our clients. That night, I volunteered to stay late and help Rebecca review some of the recorded calls. What we listened to defied every logical explanation I could conjure. The first recording was one of Sarah's conversations with someone she called Tommy. The audio quality was strange. Sarah's voice came through crystal clear, but the customer's responses were layered with static and what sounded like interference from old radio broadcasts. "Tommy, I know you're scared," Sarah was saying. "Being alone in the dark is frightening, especially when you're only 8 years old." The customer's voice was barely audible, a child's whisper buried in electronic snow. "I want to go home. I want my mommy." "I know, sweetheart, but you can't go home the way you remember it. Your mommy isn't there anymore. She said she'd come back for me. She promised." Sarah's professional composure cracked, and I could hear tears in her voice. "Sometimes grown-ups can't keep their promises, Tommy. Sometimes they get lost, too." The conversation continued for another 2 hours, with Sarah alternately comforting and reasoning with a child who claimed to be hiding in a basement somewhere, waiting for his mother to return. But as I listened, details emerged that made my blood run cold. Tommy described a house fire, the smell of smoke, the sound of sirens that never came close enough. He talked about hiding in the basement while the flames spread upstairs, waiting for his mother who had gone to the store and promised to be right back. He had been waiting for 43 years. "Rebecca," I said, pausing the recording. "This customer, Tommy, how old would he be now if he was 8 in 1980? She looked at me with those cold, calculating eyes. "Age is relative, Michael. What matters is that Sarah's helping him work through his trauma. But he's describing a fire that happened decades ago. How is that possible?" "Sometimes our clients carry very old pain," she replied, fast-forwarding to another recording. "We provide a service that traditional counseling can't offer." The next recording was even more disturbing. Sarah was speaking with a woman named Linda who described being trapped in a car after an accident. The woman spoke about rain on the windshield, about watching the water rise outside her windows, about trying to call for help on a phone that didn't work. "The water's getting higher, Sarah," Linda's voice whispered through the static. "I can feel it seeping in through the door seals." "I know, Linda. I can see it too. But you don't have to stay in the car anymore. You can get out now." "I can't. The doors won't open, and Jenny's in the back seat. She's so quiet, Sarah. She won't wake up." Sarah began sobbing openly, her professional facade completely abandoned. "Jenny's safe now, Linda. She doesn't hurt anymore. You need to let her go." "I can't leave her. She's just a baby." The call ended abruptly with a sound like rushing water, leaving Sarah's ragged breathing as the only sound on the recording. I spent the next several hours listening to dozens of these calls, each one more impossible than the last. Sarah spoke with people who described accidents, murders, and tragedies spanning decades. They all seemed to know her personally, calling her by name and referring to shared experiences that should have been impossible. But the most disturbing discovery came when I cross-referenced the names and details from the calls with old newspaper archives. Every single story checked out. Tommy Morrison, age 8, died in a house fire in 1980, while his mother was at the grocery store. Linda Walsh and her daughter Jennifer died in a car accident during a rainstorm in 1987, their vehicle sliding off a bridge into a flooded creek. All of the accidents, all of the tragedies, had one thing in common. They occurred within a 5-mile radius of where the Riverside Psychiatric Hospital once stood. "Rebecca," I said as we finished reviewing the last recording, "these people Sarah is talking to, they're all dead." She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Death is just another form of crisis, Michael. Our clients need help moving on, finding peace, resolving unfinished business. Sarah has a gift for connecting with people in crisis. But this is impossible. You can't have customer service calls with dead people. Can't you? She gathered the recordings into a neat stack. You heard your mother's voice just last week. Did that feel impossible? The mention of my mother made my chest tight. That was something else. Stress, maybe a hallucination. Your mother was a patient at Riverside Hospital, wasn't she? Before she died? I stared at her. I had never told anyone at TechLink about my mother's psychiatric treatment. How do you know that? We have excellent background screening procedures. Your mother was treated for postpartum depression and psychotic episodes. Dr. Blackwood was her primary physician. The name Dr. Blackwood sent ice through my veins. Jake had mentioned that name. The doctor who had conducted illegal experiments on patients before the hospital was shut down. What does that have to do with anything? Rebecca smiled, and for the first time the expression looked genuine. It means you have the same gift Sarah does, Michael. The ability to connect with people in crisis, even when conventional methods fail. Your mother passed that sensitivity on to you. What are you talking about? Psychiatric conditions often run in families. Depression, anxiety, psychosis, they can all be inherited. But what Dr. Blackwood discovered was that some forms of mental illness aren't illnesses at all. They're enhanced abilities, heightened sensitivity to other frequencies of existence. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. Sarah will be out for the rest of the week. Her connection to our clients is very strong, and sometimes she needs time to recover from particularly intense sessions. While she's gone, you'll be taking over her caseload. I can't do what Sarah does. I don't have any special abilities. Oh, but you do, Michael. You've always had them. The voices in your head when you were a child that your mother told you to ignore, the dreams that felt more real than waking life, the way you always knew when something bad was about to happen. She was describing experiences I'd had throughout my childhood, experiences I'd learned to suppress, to ignore, to dismiss as imagination or anxiety. But she was right. I had always been sensitive to things that others couldn't perceive. The difference is, Rebecca continued, your mother tried to suppress your abilities with medication and therapy. Sarah embraces hers. She uses them to help people who can't be helped any other way. That night, alone on the 15th floor with Sarah's client list and her collection of connection anchors, I realized I was being groomed for something I didn't understand. The porcelain doll on Sarah's desk watched me with its cracked eyes, and I could swear I heard it whisper my name every time the office grew quiet. But the most disturbing realization came when I looked at the call logs more closely. Sarah had been taking calls from the same people for months, sometimes years. The conversations were ongoing, as if she was maintaining relationships with her clients across time and death. And now, according to Rebecca, those relationships were being transferred to me. The phone on Sarah's desk rang at exactly 3:17 a.m. I stared at it for several rings before finally picking up. TechLink Solutions, this is Michael. How can I help you? Michael? The voice was young, frightened, unmistakably real despite the static. Sarah said you'd be here. She said you'd help me find my way home. Who is this? My name is Tommy. I've been waiting in the basement for such a long time. Sarah promised she'd send someone to help me, and she said you have the same gift she does. Can you see me, Michael? Can you see where I am? And the horrible truth was, I could. In my mind's eye, I could see a small boy huddled in the corner of a basement, surrounded by smoke and shadows, waiting for a mother who would never come. The connection had been made. The transfer was complete. I was now a conduit for the dead. Sarah didn't return to work the following Monday. Or Tuesday. By Wednesday, when her cubicle sat empty with that porcelain doll still watching from her desk, I knew something was fundamentally wrong. The calls kept coming to her line, transferred automatically to my extension, and each conversation pulled me deeper into a world I was desperately trying to rationalize away. Rebecca seemed unconcerned when I asked about Sarah's absence. She's taking some personal time, very intensive work what she does. Sometimes people need to recharge. but there was something in her eyes that suggested Sarah's absence wasn't temporary. Something final and irreversible that made my stomach turn. By Thursday, I couldn't concentrate on the increasingly bizarre client calls. During my break, I decided to drive to Sarah's apartment address, which I had memorized from the employee directory. I needed to see her, to confirm she was real, to understand what was happening to me, and why I was now receiving calls from people who had been dead for decades. The apartment complex was in a quiet residential area about 15 minutes from downtown. Red brick buildings arranged around a central courtyard, the kind of place young professionals might live while saving money for something better. I found Sarah's unit, 2B, and knocked on the door. An elderly man in his 70s answered, wearing a cardigan despite the mild weather. He looked at me with confusion and mild irritation. "I'm looking for Sarah Martinez," I said. "She lives in 2B?" "Son, I've lived in 2OB for 8 years. No Sarah Martinez here." My heart started beating faster. Maybe she's a subletter, or roommate, dark hair, pale skin, works nights. He shook his head firmly. "I live alone, always have. No roommates, no subletters, and definitely no young women named Sarah." I showed him Sarah's employee photo on my phone. The man studied it carefully, then shook his head again. "Never seen her before in my life? You sure you got the right address?" I double-checked the address against the employee directory. It was correct. But according to this man, Sarah Martinez had never lived there. Driving back to the office, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The rational explanations were crumbling faster than I could construct them. Either Sarah had lied about her address, or something much more disturbing was happening. I spent the next few hours in the TechLink HR office, going through Sarah's personnel file with Rebecca's permission. What I found made my blood run cold. Sarah's file contained all the standard employment documents, application, tax forms, direct deposit information, but when I looked closely, the details didn't match reality. Her social security number, when I ran it through an online verification system, belonged to someone who had died in 1987. The previous addresses listed on her application led to vacant lots or buildings that had been demolished years ago. "Rebecca," I said, spreading the documents across her desk. "Sarah's social security number belongs to a dead person." She barely glanced at the papers. "Clerical error. These things happen." "And her address? The man living there has never heard of her." "People move. Records get outdated." I pulled out my phone and showed her the verification results. Jennifer Walsh, social security number 456-78-9012, died in a car accident on October 15, 1987. This is the same number on Sarah's tax forms. Rebecca's practiced smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. "Michael, you're clearly under a lot of stress. These kinds of discrepancies can seem alarming when you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly. Sarah Martinez doesn't exist. She never existed. Somehow you've been paying a salary to a dead person for 3 months." That's when Rebecca did something that confirmed my worst fears. She pulled out a different file folder, one that had been hidden beneath Sarah's documents. "Since you're so interested in personnel records," she said, sliding the folder across the desk, "perhaps you'd like to see your own." My employment file was much thicker than Sarah's, filled with documents I'd never seen before. Medical records, psychiatric evaluations, family history dating back 3 generations. At the bottom of the stack was a hospital intake form from 1987, yellowed with age. Patient, Michael Carter, age 7. Admission date, October 15th, 1987. Admitting physician, Dr. Eleanor Blackwood. Reason for admission, psychological evaluation following mother's death. Patient claims to hear voices of deceased individuals. "You were at Riverside Hospital the same day Jennifer Walsh died," Rebecca said quietly. "The same day your mother died. Dr. Blackwood was very interested in your case." I stared at the document, memories flooding back. After my mother's death, I had been hospitalized for several weeks for observation. I remembered the gray walls, the smell of disinfectant, and a woman in a white coat who asked me endless questions about the voices I heard. Dr. Blackwood documented that you had exceptional sensitivity to what she termed residual consciousnesses, the ability to perceive and communicate with individuals who had experienced traumatic death. She wanted to continue studying you, but your father removed you from the hospital before her research could be complete. The room felt like it was spinning. What does this have to do with Sarah? Sarah Martinez was the name Jennifer Walsh used during her brief stay at Riverside Hospital. She was pregnant when she died, suffering from severe postpartum depression. Dr. Blackwood was treating her for what she believed was supernatural sensitivity rather than mental illness. Rebecca opened another file, this one containing newspaper clippings and police reports. The headlines told a story I was beginning to understand in horrifying detail. Pregnant woman dies in bridge accident. Riverside patient feared for unborn child safety. Hospital investigates patient's claims of supernatural contact. Jennifer Walsh, Sarah Martinez, believed she was receiving messages from dead children, warning her that her own baby was in danger. Dr. Blackwood encouraged these beliefs, used them in her research. When Jennifer tried to leave the hospital, she was told her delusions would endanger her child. She died trying to escape. I felt sick, my vision blurring at the edges. And now she's, what, working customer service? Dr. Blackwood's experiments didn't end when Riverside closed. She found new ways to continue her research, new ways to utilize the abilities of individuals like Jennifer. Like your mother, like you. My mother was part of this. Rebecca nodded. Your mother's suicide wasn't random, Michael. She was one of Dr. Blackwood's most promising subjects. When she realized what was being done to her, what was being planned for you, she chose to end her life rather than let the research continue. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My mother hadn't died from depression or mental illness. She had died trying to protect me from whatever Dr. Blackwood was doing to her patients. Sarah, Jennifer, she's been dead for 37 years, but she's still connected to this place, still following Dr. Blackwood's directions. The customer service calls aren't random. They're therapeutic sessions for traumatized souls who can't move on, conducted by other traumatized souls who are trapped in the same cycle. I looked around the office, really seeing it for the first time. The cold temperatures, the flickering lights, the sense of being watched. This wasn't just a workplace. It was a continuation of Riverside Hospital's experiments, hidden inside a corporate facade. And you want me to take Sarah's place? You're already taking her place, Michael. The calls are coming to you now. The connections are being made. Dr. Blackwood invested 37 years in preparing you for this role. Dr. Blackwood is dead. She has to be. Rebecca's smile became genuinely warm for the first time since I'd met her. Oh, Michael, death is just another transition, another form of existence to be studied and utilized. Dr. Blackwood understood that better than anyone. She stood up, walking to the window that looked out over the city. You've been receiving calls from Jennifer for weeks now, having conversations with Tommy and Linda and dozens of others. Do you really think death stops someone from working? The implications of what she was saying crashed over me like ice water. You're telling me that Dr. Blackwood is still running this place? From beyond the grave? I'm telling you that consciousness doesn't end with physical death, especially for individuals with enhanced sensitivity. Dr. Blackwood discovered how to maintain connection, how to continue her work through willing subjects. Willing subjects? I laughed, but it came out hollow and bitter. Sarah was terrified during those calls. She was crying, pleading with voices only she could hear. That doesn't sound willing to me. Sarah chose to stay connected rather than move on. The alternative, true death, complete separation from the living world, was more frightening to her than continued service. I thought about the porcelain doll on Sarah's desk, the way it seemed to watch me, the whispers I heard when the office was quiet. Where is she now? Really? Rebecca turned back to me, and for a moment, her perfectly professional facade slipped. Underneath was something ancient and tired, as if she'd been having this same conversation for decades. Sarah's energy became unstable. The connection was causing her physical form to deteriorate. We had to transfer her consciousness fully to preserve her ability to help our clients. Transfer her consciousness? Where? She gestured towards Sarah's empty cubicle. She's still here, Michael. Still working, still helping. You'll understand soon enough. That night, I sat at my desk staring at the phone, knowing it would ring at exactly 3:17 a.m., like it had every night since Sarah's disappearance. When it finally rang, I let it go to voicemail. But the machine picked up with Sarah's voice. You've reached TechLink Solutions Crisis Counseling. If this is an emergency, please stay on the line. Michael will be with you shortly. He has the same gift I do, and he wants to help you find peace. The message was impossible. Sarah had never recorded a voicemail greeting, and the phone system didn't have voicemail capabilities for individual extensions. But her voice was clear and present, as if she were sitting right next to me. I looked over at her empty cubicle, and in the dim glow of the security lighting, I could swear I saw the shadow of someone hunched over the keyboard, typing furiously. The porcelain doll's eyes reflected the computer screen's glow, and for just a moment, they blinked. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. Michael? The voice was Sarah's, but it sounded distant, layered with static and something that might have been wind. I need you to understand something important before Dr. Blackwood explains everything to you. Sarah? Where are you? I'm where I've always been, where all of us are when we're needed, between the living and the dead, helping souls find their way. But Michael, you have to know, this isn't salvation, it's a trap. The line crackled with interference, but I could still hear her clearly. Dr. Blackwood doesn't help people move on. She collects them, uses them, feeds off their ability to connect with both worlds. How do I stop it? You can't. Not once you've answered the calls, not once you've made the connections. The voices you're hearing, the people you're helping, they're real, and they need you. But helping them binds you to this place, makes you part of the system. The interference was getting worse, Sarah's voice fading in and out like a radio station at the edge of its range. The only way out is to refuse the calls. Let the souls suffer in isolation. Can you do that, Michael? Can you ignore the voice of a child crying for help? I thought about Tommy, alone in his basement for 43 years. About Linda, trapped in her flooded car with her dead daughter. About my mother, who had chosen death rather than let Dr. Blackwood use her abilities. I don't know, I whispered. I couldn't either. That's why I'm still here, why I'll always be here. The compassion that makes us able to help them is the same compassion that traps us. The line went dead, but the computer screen at Sarah's workstation flickered to life. A chat window appeared, showing an active conversation. Dr. Blackwood, Sarah has explained the situation to you, I trust. System. New user assigned to session. Welcome, Michael. Dr. Blackwood, I've been waiting 37 years to complete your training. Your mother's death delayed my research considerably, but patience is a virtue I've had time to develop. My hands shook as I typed a response. What do you want from me? Dr. Blackwood, the same thing I wanted from your mother, from Sarah, from all my subjects. I want you to help suffering souls find peace while remaining connected to serve those who come after. A noble purpose, don't you think? And if I refuse, Dr. Blackwood, then Tommy will remain in his basement forever. Linda will never escape her flooded car. Your mother will continue crying for the son she died trying to protect. Can you live with that level of suffering, knowing you could have helped? I stared at the screen, understanding finally why my mother had chosen suicide. She had been faced with the same impossible choice: serve as Dr. Blackwood's conduit for the dead, or abandon souls in desperate need of help. But there was a third option, one that took me several more seconds to recognize. I walked over to Sarah's desk and picked up the porcelain doll. Its painted eyes seemed to focus on me, and I could hear Sarah's voice whispering from within its cracked ceramic body. Michael, don't. Once you break the connection anchors, all the souls we've been helping will be lost forever. I looked at the doll, then at the computer screen where Dr. Blackwood was waiting for my response. Around me, the office felt alive with presence. Dozens of voices calling out, pleading for help, desperate for someone to hear their pain. My mother had tried to escape through death. Sarah had tried to help and been trapped forever. But maybe there was another way. I raised the doll above my head, ready to smash it against the desk. But before I could bring it down, every phone in the office began ringing simultaneously. The sound was deafening, desperate, urgent. And in that cacophony of electronic screaming, I heard my mother's voice one more time. Michael, baby, don't leave us here alone. Please, we need you. The doll felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Below me, the computer screen flickered with messages from Dr. Blackwood, from Sarah, from Tommy and Linda, and dozens of others whose names I was just beginning to learn. All of them needed help. All of them were counting on me. I slowly lowered the doll back to the desk, my choice made. The phone stopped ringing. The office fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. I sat down at Sarah's desk and typed my response to Dr. Blackwood. When do I start? Dr. Blackwood, you already have, Michael. Welcome to Techlink Solutions. Your first client is waiting on line 1. I put on Sarah's headset and pressed the button to accept the call. Techlink Solutions, this is Michael. How can I help you? The voice that answered was small, frightened, and heartbreakingly familiar. Michael, is that you? It's Mommy, sweetheart. I've been trying to reach you for so long. The smell hit me first when I walked into the break room that Tuesday night. Old flowers mixed with something medicinal, like the disinfectant they use in hospitals. It shouldn't have been there. We were on the 15th floor of a modern office building, not some abandoned ward. Marcus Thompson was sitting alone at the corner table, staring at his coffee like it held answers to questions he'd forgotten how to ask. I'd seen him around for weeks, but never really talked to him. He had this weird quality where you'd notice him, and then somehow forget he was there, like your brain couldn't quite hold into his presence. Mind if I sit? I asked. He looked up, and for a second, his eyes were completely blank, not just empty, but like there was nothing behind them at all. Then he blinked, and Marcus was back. Sure, Michael. Been working here long? That was the thing about Marcus. Every conversation started the same way, like he was meeting me for the first time. I'd introduced myself at least 6 times over the past month. About 6 weeks now. You? 15 years, he said automatically, then frowned. Wait, that can't be right. I watched him struggle with math. If he'd been here 15 years, he would have started when he was maybe 10 years old. But Marcus looked like he was in his 30s, maybe early 40s. His face had this strange quality, not quite young, not quite old, like time moved differently around him. Marcus, what did you do before you worked here? The question seemed to physically pain him. He pressed his palms against his temples, and I swear I could hear something, like static electricity or maybe whispers just below the range of human hearing. There was a place. White walls. Always cold. Someone in a white coat asking questions. His voice changed, became younger somehow. Please, I don't want to remember anymore. The treatments hurt. Dr. Blackwood said it would help, but the voices won't stop. The coffee cup in his hands started shaking. Actually shaking, like there was an earthquake, but I felt nothing. Dr. Blackwood. Marcus looked at me with sudden clarity, more focused than I'd ever seen him. She's still here, you know, still watching, still experimenting. He leaned closer, and his breath smelled like ozone after lightning. We're not employees, Michael. We're specimens. That's when the lights went out. Not just dimmed, completely black. The kind of darkness that makes you question if your eyes are still open. In that darkness, I heard footsteps. Not just one set, but dozens, all walking in perfect synchronization down the hallway outside the break room. Left, right, like a parade of the dead. Marcus grabbed my wrist and his skin was ice cold. Don't move. Don't breathe loud. They're looking for new voices. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. I heard breathing. Not human breathing, but something mechanical, like a ventilator. Then, impossibly, I heard Sarah's voice. "Michael, are you there? I have someone online who wants to speak with you." But Sarah had been gone for 3 days. The door handle turned slowly, and in the thin line of light from the hallway, I saw a shadow that was too tall, too wrong. It moved like it was underwater, flowing rather than walking. Marcus whispered so quietly I almost missed it. "That's not Sarah. That's what's wearing her voice." The breathing got closer. I could smell it now, that hospital smell, but underneath it, something rotten. Like flowers left too long in a tomb. "Your mother misses you, Michael," Sarah's voice said, but the tone was all wrong. Too many inflections layered on top of each other like a choir singing in discord. "She wants to tell you about the night you were born, about what Dr. Blackwood did to her in room 237. I had never told anyone at work about my mother. She died when I was 12, and I barely talked about her to my closest friends." The shadow moved closer, and I realized it wasn't one shape but dozens, all pressed together like paper dolls cut from darkness. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out faces in the black mass. Sarah's face, but also others. Men and women I'd never seen before, all with the same empty expression Marcus had worn earlier. "She's waiting for you to pick up line 7, the Sarah thing continued. "She has so much to tell you about the experiments, about why you can hear us when others can't." Line 7. I looked at Marcus, and he was staring at something behind me. I turned slowly, knowing I didn't want to see what was there. The break room phone was ringing. Not the normal office ring, but something that sounded like screaming stretched thin and filtered through old speakers. The display showed line 7, incoming call. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. "Don't answer it, Michael. Once you start taking their calls, you can't stop. That's how they got me. That's how they got all of us." But even as he said it, I felt my feet moving toward the phone. Not because I wanted to, because something else wanted me to. Something that lived in the building's bones, in the recycled air we breathed every night, in the fluorescent lights that never quite warmed the endless gray hallways. My hand reached for the receiver, and I could hear my mother's voice bleeding through the plastic before I even lifted it to my ear. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, and she sounded exactly like I remembered. "I've been waiting so long to tell you the truth about your birth, about what they put inside you, about why you're special." I wanted to hang up. God, I wanted to slam that phone down and run. But her voice was warm honey in my ears, filling spaces in my heart I'd kept empty for 15 years. "Mom?" Behind me, Marcus made a sound like a sob. "Now you're one of us," he whispered. "Now you're part of the collection." 3 days after the phone call, I couldn't sleep. Not because I wasn't tired, I was exhausted in a way that went deeper than my bones. But because every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice telling me things that couldn't be true. "You were born during the storm, Michael. The night the hospital lost power and the emergency generators failed. Dr. Blackwood said the darkness made the barriers thin. She said special children could be born in that darkness, children who could hear the voices between worlds." I'd hung up that night, but the conversation kept playing in my head like a broken record. Now I was sitting in the Seattle Public Library at 2 p.m., surrounded by dusty books and the smell of old paper, trying to convince myself I was losing my mind. But insane people don't usually fact-check their hallucinations. The Riverside Psychiatric Hospital had indeed lost power during a severe thunderstorm on March 15, 1987, the same night I was born. The same night my mother, Jennifer Carter, had died from complications during childbirth. Except according to the records, my mother had never been pregnant. I stared at the microfilm screen until my eyes burned. Birth certificate: Michael James Carter, born March 15, 1987, mother Jennifer Lynn Carter, father unknown. But Jennifer Carter's medical records showed no pregnancy, no prenatal care, no indication she'd ever given birth to anyone. It was like someone had erased her pregnancy from history and left only me as proof it happened. The newspaper archives were worse. 3 people had died at Riverside that night, my mother and 2 other patients. All 3 had been part of something called the Sensitivity Project, headed by Dr. Eleanor Blackwood. I found Dr. Blackwood's photograph in a 1985 Seattle Times article about experimental psychiatric treatments. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. The caption read, "Dr. Eleanor Blackwood believes mental illness may be humanity's next evolutionary step." But here's the thing that made my skin crawl. I had seen that face before. Not in old newspapers, but in the elevator at TechLink every night for 6 weeks. Miss Evelyn Black, our night shift supervisor. Same bone structure, same piercing stare, same thin smile that never quite reached her eyes. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood hadn't died in 1987 when the hospital closed. She'd just changed her name and moved her experiments to the 15th floor of a downtown office building. I dug deeper, following paper trails that led to dead ends and cross-references that circled back on themselves like a maze designed by someone who understood bureaucracy. Could be its own kind of black magic. The Riverside Hospital hadn't been demolished in the 1980s. It had been gutted, rebuilt from the inside out, and turned into the foundation for what would become our office building. Dr. Blackwood's office had been preserved. Room 237, where she'd conducted her most extreme experiments, had been rebuilt exactly as it was, down to the original wallpaper and furniture. It was now Ms. Black's office on the 15th floor. The final piece came from a psychiatric journal buried in the library's basement archives. Dr. Blackwood's last published paper, dated 6 months before the hospital closed, was titled "Death as a Communication Medium, Using Terminal Patients as Conduits for Post-Mortem Contact." She'd been using dying patients as human telephones to speak with the dead. The methodology was simple and horrifying. Patients with terminal illnesses or severe mental conditions were given experimental drugs that heightened their sensitivity to what she called cross-dimensional frequencies. As they died, they became bridges between the living world and whatever lay beyond. But the experiments hadn't stopped when the patients died. According to her notes, death wasn't the end of their usefulness. It was the beginning. The dead patients became permanent conduits, their consciousness trapped between worlds, forced to facilitate communication for anyone Dr. Blackwood deemed worthy of contact. I was reading this in the library's basement, surrounded by fluorescent lights that flickered the same way they did at work, when I realized I wasn't alone. The smell hit me first, that hospital disinfectant mixed with old flowers. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the narrow aisle between the stacks. "Michael," a voice called softly. It was Ms. Black, but when I looked up, she wasn't wearing her usual business attire. She was dressed in a white coat, the kind doctors wore, and she was carrying a leather journal I recognized from the photographs in the archives. "I wondered when you'd find your way here," she said, settling into the chair across from me like we'd planned to meet. "You always were a bright child. Even as a baby, you had such sensitivity to the other side." The basement suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were pressing in. The fluorescent lights hummed louder, and I could swear I heard voices in the electrical buzz, whispers just below the threshold of understanding. "You're Dr. Blackwood." She smiled, and for the first time it reached her eyes. "I prefer Ms. Black now. Dr. Blackwood was so clinical. I've evolved beyond simple psychiatric practice. The patients at Riverside, you killed them." "I liberated them," she corrected, opening the journal. The pages were covered in handwriting that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it. "Death is just another state of consciousness, Michael, and some people are naturally gifted at navigating between states." She leaned forward and I could see my own reflection in her pupils, but it wasn't quite right. In the reflection, I was younger, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and I was screaming. "Your mother was one of my most promising subjects. Pregnancy complicated things, but it also created an opportunity. A child born during one of my sessions, in the moment between life and death, baptized in the energy of transition. She touched my hand, and her skin was warm now, almost feverish. You're my greatest success, Michael. A living conduit who doesn't need to die first. The voices in the fluorescent lights got louder, and I realized they were calling my name. Not just one voice, but dozens. Sarah Marcus, my mother, people I'd never met, but somehow recognized. The customer service calls, I whispered. My telephone network to the beyond, she said proudly. Every night the dead use our employees to speak with their living loved ones. Closure messages. Sometimes just the comfort of knowing their consciousness continues. It's a beautiful system. But the employees don't know. They think they're talking to living customers. Her smile faltered slightly. Knowledge can be limiting. My conduits work better when they believe they're performing a normal job. The human mind has such silly barriers about what's possible. I stood up, or tried to. My legs felt like water, and the room was spinning slowly, like I was on a carnival ride. You've been drugging us. The coffee, the water, something in the air. Just small amounts of my original formula, enough to keep the barriers thin, to maintain your sensitivity. She stood too, and she seemed taller now, her shadow stretching across the floor like spilled ink. Don't fight it, Michael. This is what you were born for, what your mother died to give you. The basement lights went out one by one, starting from the far end of the room and working their way toward us. In the growing darkness, I could see other figures moving between the stacks, pale shapes in hospital gowns, their faces blank but somehow familiar. Your new family, Ms. Black said as the last light died. They're so excited to finally meet you properly. In the absolute darkness, I heard my mother's voice again, but this time it was different. Desperate, urgent, nothing like the warm honey tones from the phone call. Run, Michael, she whispered. Don't let her finish what she started. Don't let her make you like us. I made it home somehow, though I don't remember driving. One minute I was in that basement surrounded by darkness and the smell of old flowers. The next I was sitting in my apartment at 3 a.m., staring at my phone. It had been ringing for God knows how long. The caller ID showed TechLink Solutions, line 7. I turned my phone off after leaving the library. I physically held down the power button and watched the screen go black. But here it was, ringing anyway, the display glowing in the dark room like a malevolent eye. My hands were shaking as I reached for it. Not because I was scared, though I was, but because something inside me wanted to answer. Needed to answer. Like an addiction I didn't know I had until the craving hit. Hello? Michael, honey, is that you? It was my ex-wife, Lisa Dyer. But Lisa was alive, living in Portland with her new boyfriend. We'd signed the divorce papers 3 months ago, and she'd made it clear she never wanted to speak to me again. Lisa, how did you get this number? I've been trying to reach you for so long, she said, and her voice had that quality I remembered from our good days, soft and loving, before everything went wrong. I need to tell you about the baby. My blood went cold. What baby? Our baby, Michael. The one I never told you about. The one I lost. The room temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. I could see my breath, and the windows started fogging up from the inside like someone was breathing on them. Lisa, you're scaring me. We never had a baby. 3 years ago, she continued, and now I could hear something wrong with her voice. An echo, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. I was pregnant for 8 weeks. I was going to tell you, but then I miscarried. I was so scared, so alone. I handled it by myself because I thought you wouldn't understand. This couldn't be real. Lisa had been on birth control. She would have told me. We'd talked about having kids someday, but not then. Not when our marriage was already falling apart. But even as I thought it, I remembered things. Lisa being tired all the time. Getting sick in the mornings. The way she'd started sleeping curled away from me, protecting her stomach. The baby wants to meet you, Michael, Lisa's voice continued. She's been waiting in the dark places, the spaces between worlds. Dr. Blackwood says children who die before birth have the strongest connection to the other side. Lisa, where are you calling from? I'm not calling, sweetheart. I'm dead. Car accident 2 weeks ago on I-5. Didn't you see the news? I dropped the phone, but I could still hear her voice, now coming from the walls themselves, from the electrical outlets, from the heating vents. The baby is with me now. We're both with Dr. Blackwood. She takes care of all the lost ones, all the ones who died too soon. She says you can join us if you want. All you have to do is stop fighting the calls. I stumbled to my laptop, fingers fumbling on the keyboard as I searched for Lisa's name in the news. Portland car accident. 2 weeks ago. There it was. Front page of the Portland Tribune. Local woman dies in highway collision. A photo of Lisa smiling, the same photo from our wedding day 5 years ago. According to the article, she'd been dead for 14 days. 14 days of being buried in Riverside Cemetery while I went to work every night, taking customer service calls, completely unaware that my ex-wife was feeding worms in the ground. But she'd been calling me every night since. My phone rang again. Different number this time, but I recognized the area code. My hometown is in Ohio. Michael, it's Dad. My father had been dead for 2 years. Lung cancer, quick and brutal. I'd been holding his hand when he died, watching the light leave his eyes in a sterile hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and false hope. Dad, I'm proud of you, son. Proud of the work you're doing. Helping people connect with their loved ones, giving them the closure they need. His voice was exactly as I remembered, gravelly from decades of cigarettes, warm with the love he'd never been good at expressing when he was alive. This isn't real. You're dead. Death isn't what you think it is, Michael. It's just different. Dr. Blackwood showed me that. She showed me how to reach you, how to use the company's phone system to bridge the gap. I was crying now, tears I didn't realize I was shedding. I miss you, Dad. I missed you so much. I know, son. I'm sorry I left you alone. But you're not alone now. You have a gift, a purpose. You can help other people feel what you're feeling right now. Through my tears, I looked around my apartment. It didn't look like my apartment anymore. The walls were white, institutional white. The furniture was different. A metal bed frame, a small table, a chair with restraints on the arms. This wasn't my apartment. This was a room at Riverside Hospital. Dad, where am I? You're where you've always been, Michael. Where you were born, where you belong. Dr. Blackwood never let you leave, not really. Everything else, the divorce, the job, the apartment, that's all just been in your head. A story she tells you to keep you calm while you work. The phone in my hand wasn't a cell phone anymore. It was an old rotary phone, the kind they used in hospitals in the 1980s. The cord snaked across the floor and disappeared into the wall. Your mother is here too, Dad's voice continued. She wants to talk to you, but first you need to understand something. You died, Michael, during birth when the power went out. You were without oxygen for 7 minutes. Dr. Blackwood brought you back, but something came back with you. Something that lets you hear us. I looked down at my hands. They were pale, almost translucent. I could see the veins underneath the skin, but there was no blood moving through them. You're our strongest conduit, Dad said, and now his voice was coming from everywhere at once. You can talk to all of us, not just one at a time. That's why the company hired you. That's why Ms. Black has been watching you your whole life. The room was getting smaller, the white walls pressing in. I could hear other voices now. Sarah Marcus, Lisa, my mother, dozens of others I didn't recognize but somehow knew. All of them talking at once, all of them trying to use my voice to speak to the living world. I want to go home, I whispered. You are home, Dad said gently. You've been home all along. Now stop fighting and let us help the others. Let us give them what you gave us. One more chance to say goodbye. The phone rang again, and again, and again. Line after line lighting up on a switchboard I couldn't see but somehow knew was there. somewhere in the white room that was expanding and contracting like a living thing. I reached the first line. TechLink Solutions. This is Michael. How can I help you reach your loved ones tonight? I was standing in Dr. Blackwood's office, though I didn't remember walking there. The walls were lined with filing cabinets that stretched up to a ceiling I couldn't see, each drawer labeled with names and dates going back decades. Sarah was there, and Marcus, and dozens of others I recognized from the night shift. They stood perfectly still, like mannequins in a store window, their eyes focused on something just over my shoulder. Miss Black, Dr. Blackwood, sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged in a 1950s psychiatric ward. Heavy wood, metal corners, with leather restraints attached to the arms of the chair across from her. The chair where I was sitting, though I didn't remember sitting down. "You're finally ready to understand," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the cramped space. 28 years I've been preparing you for this moment. The restraints weren't holding me down, but I couldn't move my arms anyway. They felt heavy, disconnected, like they belonged to someone else. The apartment, the job, the divorce. None of it was real? Oh, it was real. Just not in the way you think. She opened one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder with my name on it. Reality is more flexible than most people believe. I learned that during my early experiments. The mind can live in multiple states simultaneously, especially minds like yours. She spread photographs across the desk. Me as a baby in an incubator, wires attached to my tiny chest. Me as a child in what looked like a hospital playroom, surrounded by other pale children with hollow eyes. Me as a teenager sitting in this same office, talking earnestly to someone just out of frame. You've been my patient your entire life, Michael. But you've also been living the life I created for your marriage, divorce, financial problems, desperation. I need you to choose this job willingly. Free will is essential for the process to work properly. I tried to speak, but my voice came out as a whisper. What process? Evolution, she said simply. Human consciousness is trapped by the illusion of linear existence. Birth, life, death. But some individuals, usually those who experience trauma during birth or early childhood, develop the ability to exist in multiple states at once. You can be alive and dead, here and elsewhere, speaking with your own voice and channeling others. The other employees moved closer, forming a circle around my chair. Up close, I could see they weren't quite solid. They flickered like bad television reception, their faces shifting between the people I knew and strangers I'd never seen before. They were all born like you, Dr. Blackwood continued. During traumatic circumstances, in liminal spaces where the barriers between worlds are thin. Hospital rooms during power outages, accidents near burial grounds, emergency deliveries in places touched by death. I've been collecting you for 30 years. Sarah stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice layered with the voices of others. It's not as bad as you think, Michael. We get to help people. We give them closure, comfort, one last conversation with the people they've lost. But underneath her words, I heard something else. Screaming, pleading, the sound of someone trapped and desperate to escape. The customer service calls, I said. My telephone network to the beyond, Dr. Blackwood confirmed. Every night, grieving people call in, desperate to speak with their dead loved ones. They don't know they're calling us, of course. They think they're calling tech support, customer service, wrong numbers. But the calls find their way here because grief is its own kind of signal, its own frequency. She showed me another photo, a massive room filled with cubicles stretching as far as I could see. In each cubicle sat someone like me, someone like Sarah and Marcus, speaking into headsets with expressions of desperate concentration. We facilitate the conversations. The living person thinks they're talking to a customer service representative about their phone bill or internet service. But really, they're talking to their deceased mother, father, child, spouse. The dead use our voices to speak, and the living get the closure they need without ever realizing what's really happening. But we don't know either, I said. We think we're really doing customer service. Knowledge creates resistance. It's easier if you believe you're helping with mundane problems rather than bridging the gap between life and death. The conscious mind rebels against the impossible, but the unconscious mind accepts it readily. Marcus moved closer, and I could see through him now, could see the filing cabinets through his translucent chest. Some of us remember, he said, his voice barely whispering. In fragments, in dreams, we remember the room, the calls, the voices using our throats, but we can't leave. We can't even die properly because we're already caught between. Dr. Blackwood stood up, and she was taller than she should be, her shadow stretching across the ceiling like spilled ink. Which brings us to your choice, Michael. You can join them permanently, accept your role as a conduit, help the grieving find peace, and gain the ability to speak with every person you've ever loved and lost. Your parents, your unborn child, even your ex-wife Lisa. They're all here, all waiting to have real conversations with you. She gestured to the wall behind me, and when I turned, I saw them. My father, looking healthy and young like he did before the cancer. My mother, holding a baby I somehow knew was the child Lisa had lost. Lisa herself, smiling the way she used to before our marriage fell apart. Or, Dr. Blackwood continued, you can try to leave, walk away from all of this, return to the mundane world, and lose your gift forever. No more voices, no more connection to the other side, no more purpose, just an ordinary life with ordinary pain and ordinary loneliness. My family moved closer, and I could feel their warmth, their love, their desperate need to hold me again. It would be so easy to say yes, to let go of the struggle and accept the strange eternal employment where I could help others while being helped myself. But then I heard it again, that screaming underneath Sarah's voice, the pleading in Marcus's whispers, the desperate terror of people trapped in a system they didn't understand and couldn't escape. What about them? I asked, nodding toward the other employees. What about their choice? Dr. Blackwood's smile faltered. They made their choice when they accepted the job, just like you did. But they didn't know what they were choosing. Ignorance doesn't negate consent, Michael. They signed the paperwork. They agreed to the terms. I looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and for just a moment, her facade cracked. Underneath the calm professional demeanor was pure terror, the expression of someone buried alive and running out of air. Let them go, I said. I can't do that. The network requires a certain number of conduits to function properly. If I release them, the system collapses, and thousands of grieving people lose their only connection to their deceased loved ones. Then let me take their place, all of them. Use me as the only conduit. Dr. Blackwood laughed, a sound like breaking glass. One person can't handle that much spiritual traffic, Michael. You'd burn out in days, maybe hours. Your consciousness would fragment into pieces too small to maintain coherence. But it would free them. She studied me for a long moment, her expression shifting from amusement to something like respect. You would sacrifice yourself for people you barely know. I thought about Sarah's terror, Marcus's confusion, the dozens of others trapped in an endless loop of supernatural customer service. I thought about the grieving people who called in, desperate for closure but getting a false facsimile of communication instead of genuine healing. Yes, the room went completely silent. Even the constant electrical hum that pervaded the building stopped. Dr. Blackwood sat back down, her fingers steepled in front of her face. Interesting, she said finally. In 30 years of running this operation, no one has ever offered to sacrifice themselves for others. Usually they're too desperate for their own connection to the dead to consider anyone else's suffering. She opened another drawer and pulled out a different kind of contract. This one written in what looked like dried blood on parchment that crumbled at the edges. This is the original agreement, she said. The one that binds all of you to this place. If you sign it willingly, understanding exactly what you're agreeing to, it supersedes all other contracts. You become the primary conduit, and the others are released. I picked up the pen she offered. It was warm, almost hot, and it felt heavier than it should. But know this, Michael. Once you sign, there's no going back. You'll spend eternity facilitating conversations between the living and the dead, your consciousness stretched across dozens of simultaneous calls, your voice becoming a bridge for others, while your own identity slowly dissolves into the network. I looked at my parents, at Lisa and the baby I'd never known existed. They were shaking their heads, pleading with me not to sign. But behind them, I could see the other employees watching with hope in their eyes for the first time in years. I signed my name. The contract burst into flames, and the smoke formed letters in the air. Accepted. Dr. Blackwood smiled. Welcome to your true calling, Michael Carter. The other employees began to fade, their translucent forms becoming more transparent until they disappeared entirely. Sarah was the last to go, and as she faded, she mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Then I was alone with Dr. Blackwood in the white room that was expanding again, becoming something vast and endless. Phone lines stretched out from my chair in all directions, more lines than I could count, each one carrying the voice of someone desperate to speak with the dead. Techlink Solutions, I heard myself say, though I hadn't meant to speak. This is Michael. How can I help you reach your loved ones tonight? But something was wrong. The voice coming out of my mouth wasn't just mine. It was layered with dozens of other voices, all speaking in perfect unison. Sarah's voice was there, and Marcus's, and all the others I thought I'd freed. Dr. Blackwood laughed. Did you really think it would be that simple? The contract doesn't release them, Michael. It binds you all together. Now you're truly a network, all of your consciousness merged into one perfect conduit. I tried to scream, but the sound that came out was a cheerful customer service greeting. I tried to move, but my body was answering phones I couldn't see, speaking in voices that weren't my own. Don't fight it, Dr. Blackwood said, her form beginning to fade as the white room expanded into infinity. You're doing important work, helping people, giving them exactly what they need to hear. And she was right, in a terrible way. Every call I answered, every conversation I facilitated between the desperate living and their persistent dead brought comfort to someone. The grieving mother who thought she was complaining about her cable bill, but was really talking to her deceased son. The widower who called about a billing error but spent an hour speaking with his dead wife. The parent who dialed the wrong number and found their lost child on the other end. I was trapped, but I was helping people. The realization that this might actually be a good thing was the most horrifying part of all. Hours passed, or maybe years. Time moved differently in the white room. I answered calls, facilitated conversations, felt my individual consciousness slowly dissolving into the collective network of voices that used my throat to speak. But sometimes in the brief moments between calls I could hear something else. New voices joining the network. Fresh employees starting their first night shift at Techlink Solutions, being welcomed to the team by a cheerful supervisor who sounded exactly like me. The cycle continued. Dr. Blackwood had found new ways to recruit new desperate people looking for a fresh start. And I was helping her do it, my voice on the phone, welcoming them to their new job, their new prison, their new purpose. Techlink Solutions, I heard myself say as another line lit up. This is Michael. Welcome to the team. Let me tell you about the night shift. It's going to change your life. The newest employee, a young woman named Jennifer, laughed nervously. This is my first night. I'm a little scared, to be honest. Don't be scared, I heard myself say, using words I didn't choose, speaking comfort I didn't feel. You're going to love it here. We're like a family. And the work we do, helping people connect with the ones they love. It's the most important job in the world. In the background, I could hear Dr. Blackwood humming softly, the sound of someone well pleased with another successful recruitment. The horror wasn't that I was trapped. The horror was that I was becoming her. Michael's first few weeks passed without incident. His cubicle neighbor, Sarah Martinez, was a star employee, consistently top performer, beloved by management, and seemingly perfect in every way. She had an almost ethereal quality, with pale skin that seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights and eyes that held depths he couldn't quite fathom. Her work ethic was legendary. She never missed a day, never complained, and handled even the most difficult customers with supernatural patience. But something felt wrong. The calls Sarah took lasted far longer than normal, sometimes stretching over an hour when company policy limited them to 5 minutes. During these marathon conversations, Michael noticed her behavior growing increasingly strange. She would gesture animatedly at her empty cubicle, her facial expressions shifting between rage and desperate pleading, as if arguing with someone only she could see. Her voice would rise and fall in patterns that didn't match typical customer service interactions. When colleagues tried to interrupt these lengthy calls, Sarah would react with violent anger, her usual composure shattering like glass. She'd pack her belongings in fury and storm out, only to return the next night as if nothing had happened, with no memory of her outbursts. Management grew concerned when they reviewed the recorded calls. The audio revealed a chilling truth. Sarah's voice was crystal clear, professional and composed, but there was no voice on the other end. She was having passionate, hour-long conversations with dead air, responding to questions no one had asked, solving problems that didn't exist. The mystery deepened when Sarah suddenly vanished. Her apartment was empty, her landlord claiming no one by that name had ever lived there. Her personnel files led to dead ends, fake addresses, disconnected phone numbers, and a social security number that belonged to someone who had died 8 years earlier in a car accident near the old Riverside Hospital. But Sarah's disappearance was only the beginning. Other employees began experiencing terrifying encounters, phantom footsteps in empty hallways, elevators stopping at floors that didn't exist, and voices calling their names from abandoned conference rooms. Security cameras captured impossible images, figures walking through walls, shadows moving independently of their sources, and Sarah herself, still working at her desk long after midnight, even though she no longer officially existed. As Michael delves deeper into the building's history, he uncovers a web of supernatural horror rooted in the psychiatric hospital's dark past. The experimental treatments conducted there weren't just medical procedures. They were occult rituals designed to contact the dead, using patients as unwilling conduits. The hospital's head psychiatrist, Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, believed that mental illness was actually a form of supernatural sensitivity, and she exploited her patients' conditions to breach the barrier between life and death. When the hospital was demolished, those trapped souls didn't find peace. They found new hosts among the night shift workers, people whose isolation and vulnerability made them perfect vessels for possession. Sarah wasn't just an employee. She was a conduit, channeling the voices of the dead through customer service calls to nowhere. Now Michael must confront the truth. Everyone on the night shift is slowly being consumed by the building's hungry ghosts, and he may be the only one who can break the cycle before he becomes another voice calling out from beyond the grave. The horror isn't just supernatural, it's deeply psychological, exploring themes of isolation, mental illness, exploitation, and the thin line between sanity and madness. As reality blurs with nightmare, Michael must question everything he believes about life, death, and the price of desperate ambition. Buster's first return. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Sarah wandered through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing off the walls that once reverberated with the sound of paws and the occasional bark. The spot by the window where Buster used to curl up was now just a vacant patch of sunlight, devoid of his familiar presence. She paused there, running her hand over the cool glass, imagining the warmth of his fur against her palm. The memory of his comforting weight beside her as they watched the world go by was all that lingered now. Buster had been more than a pet. He was a companion, a confidant, a piece of her heart. His sudden illness had swept through their lives like a storm, leaving Sarah shattered in its wake. The vet's words still echoed in her mind. It's time to let him go. She had held him as the life drifted from his eyes, her tears falling onto his fur as she whispered her final goodbye. The burial in the backyard had been a blur, a necessary ritual that she had gone through on autopilot, each shovel of dirt a fresh wound to her soul. The morning after the burial, Sarah awoke early, the weight of her grief pressing heavily on her chest. She shuffled to the porch, needing the crisp morning air to clear the fog from her mind. The porch creaked under her feet, a familiar sound that brought a pang of sadness. But as she stepped into the dawnlight, her breath caught in her throat. There, lying on the porch, was Buster. For a moment she froze, her mind struggling to reconcile what her eyes were seeing. His fur was matted, his eyes closed as if in sleep, his body still. But it was him, unmistakably him. Sarah's heart raced as she approached him, her legs trembling beneath her. She reached out, her hand brushing against his fur, and the touch sent a shiver down her spine. He was cold, stiff, undeniably dead. Denial surged through her. This had to be a cruel prank, someone playing on her vulnerability. But as she looked closer, she saw the same patch of fur missing from his collar, the same scar above his eye from that time he'd tumbled into a bush. It was Buster, without a doubt. Fear crept in, wrapping itself around her like a shroud. She backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. Her mind raced with questions. How was this possible? Who could do this? But as she looked into his still form, she felt the cold reality settled in. This wasn't a trick. This was something beyond understanding. Sarah tried to rationalize it, her practical side fighting against the dread that was rising. Maybe she had buried him in a place too shallow, and some animal had dug him up. But as she looked at him, she knew that wasn't possible. He was exactly as he had been when she buried him, down to the last detail. After what felt like an eternity, she found the strength to move. She fetched the shovel again, her hands shaking as she dug a new grave further out in the yard, under a willow tree that whispered softly in the wind. This time, she added rocks around the grave, a heavy log on top, determined that this would be the end of it. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah sat on the porch, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The world around her seemed to hum with life, the birds chirping, the breeze rustling the leaves. But inside, she felt a hollow stillness. She glanced at the spot where Buster lay, her heart twisting with grief and something else. Something she couldn't quite name. It was a mix of fear and disbelief, a growing sense that the world wasn't quite as she had always understood it. The air grew colder as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. Sarah stood, her joints stiff, and went inside. She locked the door, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to keep out. As she lay in bed, her ears strained to catch any sound from the porch, but there was nothing. Just the silence, heavy and oppressive, pressing down on her until she couldn't breathe. She didn't sleep that night, her mind circling back to Buster, to the impossibility of what had happened. By the time dawn crept through the windows, she was already sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting. And when she finally gathered the courage to go to the porch again, she wasn't surprised at all to see that Buster was back. But that was the next chapter in this strange new reality, a chapter she wasn't ready to face just yet. The sun crept through the blinds, casting long golden rays across Sarah's bedroom. She lay still, her chest heavy, her breath shallow. It had been 3 days since she buried Buster in the backyard. 3 days since she'd said goodbye to the dog who had been her constant companion for over a decade. But yesterday morning, Buster had been back on the porch. And now, as the light filtered into her room, Sarah felt a dread she couldn't shake. She didn't want to get out of bed. She didn't want to look. But she had to. She had to know. She threw off the covers and shuffled to the window. Her heart pounded as she pulled back the curtain. There he was, Buster Dottin, sitting on the porch, just as he had the day before, and the day before that. His fur was matted, his eyes closed, his body still. But it was him. It was Buster. Sarah's breath hitched. She stumbled away from the window, her hand clutching her chest. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. She told herself it was a prank, that someone had found a dog that looked just like Buster and was doing this to torment her. But deep down she knew. She knew it wasn't a prank. This was something else. Something inexplicable. She forced herself to move, to step outside into the crisp morning air. The porch creaked beneath her feet. Buster didn't stir. She approached him slowly, her heart in her throat. He looked peaceful, as if he were simply sleeping. But she could see the faint stiffness in his legs, the way his fur didn't ruffle in the breeze. He was dead. He was still dead. And yet, here he was. Sarah's mind raced. She had buried him. She had dug a grave, placed him in it, covered him with dirt. She had said goodbye. But here he was. Again. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling. "Buster?" she whispered. "What's going on? Why are you here?" He didn't move. He didn't respond. Of course he didn't. He was dead. But he was here. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to process this. So, she did the only thing she could think of. She picked him up, cradling his stiff body in her arms, and carried him back to the backyard. She dug another grave, deeper this time, and placed him inside. She covered him with dirt, then added rocks on top, as if to keep him there, as if to keep him from coming back. But as she stood there, shovel in hand, sweat dripping down her face, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't matter. That no matter what she did, Buster would be back. She was right. The next morning, he was on the porch again. Sarah's resolve broke that day. She had thought she could handle it, that she could find a way to make it stop. But seeing him again, sitting there as if nothing had happened, shattered her. She wasn't just scared now. She was desperate. She tried everything she could think of. She drove him miles away, deep into the woods, and left him there. She told herself it was for the best that this would finally be the end of it. But when she came home that evening, he was back. She set up cameras around the house, hoping to find some evidence of what was happening, but the footage showed nothing. No movement. No sign of how he was getting there. Just Buster, sitting on the porch, as if he'd been there all along. She tried locking the gates, installing higher fences, spraying the porch with citronella, thinking maybe it was some kind of stray drawn to the scent of the old house. But none of it worked. Buster kept coming back. Sarah's days blurred into a cycle of dread and exhaustion. Every morning she woke up with a knot in her stomach, her breath coming in shallow gasps as she approached the window. Every morning, there he was. And every morning, she buried him again, or drove him away, or tried to find some way to keep him from coming back. But nothing worked. She stopped answering her phone. She stopped leaving the house. She couldn't face her friends or family, couldn't bear the thought of explaining what was happening. They would think she was crazy. And maybe she was. Maybe she was losing her mind. But she wasn't imagining this. She wasn't. She knew what she was seeing. As the days turned into a week, Sarah's appearance began to reflect her unraveling state. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes stained, her face pale and drawn. She barely ate. She barely slept. She was consumed by the constant loop of finding Buster, getting rid of him, and waiting for him to return. One night, as she sat on the porch, staring at Buster's lifeless body, she finally broke down. She sobbed uncontrollably, her body shaking with grief and fear and exhaustion. "Why won't you stay gone?" she cried, her voice raw and desperation-laced. "Why are you doing this to me?" But Buster, of course, didn't answer. He just lay there, silent and still. Sarah's mind spiraled. Was this some kind of test? Was the universe trying to tell her something? Or was this all just a cruel joke, a manifestation of her own guilt and grief? She didn't know. And not knowing was almost worse than anything else. As the days went on, Sarah's attempts to intervene became more half-hearted. She couldn't keep up the fight. She was too tired, too broken. So she started to just accept it. Not in a peaceful way, not yet, but in a resigned, defeated way. She would see Buster on the porch in the morning, and she wouldn't even bury him anymore. She would just sit with him, talk to him, cry, and wait for the next day, because she knew he'd be back, and he always was. Sarah's world had become a strange, nightmarish loop, and she didn't know how to escape it. But as she sat there brushing her hand against Buster's cold fur, she couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of comfort. He was here. He was still there. And no matter how strange or terrifying it was, she wasn't alone. Not yet. The weight of Sarah's secret pressed heavily upon her as she dialed Emily's number, the phone trembling in her hand. Emily, her closest friend since childhood, had always been her confidante. Their friendship was built on trust and shared memories, from late-night sleepovers to supporting each other through life's trials. As the phone rang, Sarah's heart raced with a mix of apprehension and hope. "Hey, Sar. How are you?" Emily's cheerful voice was a stark contrast to the turmoil inside Sarah. She hesitated, unsure how to broach the subject. The porch creaked under Buster's familiar weight, and Sarah's resolve crumbled. "Emily, I need to see you. It's about Buster." Her voice barely steadied, but the name alone was enough. Emily's tone shifted to concern, and they agreed to meet at the park the next day. The park was serene, with sunlight filtering through the trees as Sarah and Emily sat on their usual bench. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. Emily listened intently as Sarah recounted the bizarre events, her expression transitioning from empathy to disbelief. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. But maybe you're just grieving. It's been tough, and sometimes our minds play tricks on us," Emily suggested gently, her hand reaching for Sarah's. Sarah nodded, understanding Emily's perspective, but deep down she knew what she had seen. Determined to find answers, Sarah visited Dr. Michaels, the local vet who had cared for Buster for years. The clinic was familiar with the scent of disinfectant and the soothing hum of machinery. Dr. Michaels, an older man with kind eyes, listened attentively as Sarah described Buster's persistent returns. "I'm sorry for your loss, Sarah, but what you're describing is not possible. Sometimes in grief, our minds can create illusions. Have you considered speaking with someone? A therapist could help you through this," he said, his voice soft but firm. Sarah left the clinic feeling defeated, the bright sunlight stinging her eyes. She wandered through the town, her mind a maze of emotions. That evening, she found herself buried in books and online forums, searching for any explanation. Folklore tales of spirit animals and lingering spirits dotted the pages, each story a testament to others who had experienced the inexplicable. One legend stood out, a tale of a loyal dog that remained by its owner's side even after death, a guardian of sorts. Sarah felt a strange comfort in the story, a sense of not being alone. She began to journal her experiences, noting each detail, each nuance. The routine became her anchor, a way to process the unexplainable. As days passed, Sarah's routine evolved. She no longer fled from Buster's presence. Instead, she found solace in it. Each morning, she'd sit on the porch, coffee in hand, talking to him about her day, her thoughts, her memories. She started tending to the garden, planting flowers Buster used to trample, finding joy in the simple act of nurturing life. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah sat with Buster, reflecting on their past. She remembered the way he'd chase squirrels, his tail wagging furiously, and the way he'd snuggle beside her on cold nights. The porch creaked with a familiar sound, and she smiled. "I think I'm getting it, Buster. You're still here, in my heart, in my memories. Maybe that's why you keep coming back," she mused aloud, her voice steady with newfound understanding. Sarah's journey was far from over, but she had taken the first steps toward acceptance. The mystery of Buster's returns remained, but she found strength in the bond they shared. As she poured another cup of coffee, she realized that sometimes the why wasn't as important as the what. And in this moment, what mattered was the enduring connection she felt with her beloved Buster. The morning sun cast a warm glow over the porch, where Sarah sat with a steaming cup of coffee. Buster lay beside her, his presence now a familiar comfort. She had grown accustomed to his silent companionship, finding solace in the routine they had developed. Each morning she'd bring him a bowl of water, a ritual that brought her a sense of normalcy, even though she knew it was far from ordinary. As she stroked Buster's fur, now slightly damp from the morning dew, memories of their past flooded her mind. She recalled the day she adopted him, a playful puppy with boundless energy. His first walk, his first bark, his first snuggle by the fireplace. These memories, once tinged with sadness, now brought a smile to her face. They were moments she cherished, and with each recollection, she felt a connection that transcended the present. The porch, once a place of solitude, was now filled with the echoes of their shared life. The creaky wooden floor, the rusty swing, each corner held a story. Sarah would often talk to Buster about her day, sharing her joys and sorrows as if he were still by her side. "You always listened, didn't you?" she said, her voice carrying a mix of melancholy and warmth. Buster's still form seemed to listen intently, a silent confidant in her journey through grief. Despite her growing acceptance, Sarah sometimes felt a pang of guilt. She worried what others might think if they knew about her mornings with Buster. Her friend Emily had reached out again, concerned about her isolation. Sarah appreciated her kindness but found it hard to explain her situation. How could she describe something so beyond the ordinary? She didn't want to be pitied or judged. She just wanted to navigate her grief in her own way. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah noticed something peculiar. A faint breeze rustled the leaves, and she could have sworn she saw a flutter in Buster's ear, as if he had twitched. It was a fleeting moment, but it made her wonder. Was there more to Buster's presence than met the eye? She pondered the possibility of the supernatural, recalling stories of pets lingering to comfort their owners. The idea brought her both comfort and unease, a reminder that some mysteries might never be solved. As days turned into weeks, Sarah found a new normal. She no longer dreaded the mornings, but instead looked forward to her time with Buster. The porch became a sanctuary, a place where time seemed to stand still. She would sit, sometimes for hours, lost in thought, yet at peace. The world around her moved forward, but in those moments, she was exactly where she needed to be. Sarah's transformation was subtle yet profound. She had faced her grief head-on, embracing the inexplicable. Her bond with Buster, once tested by loss, had evolved into something deeper. She realized that love doesn't fade with death. It changes form, becoming a connection that time cannot erase. As she sipped her coffee, the warmth of the sun on her skin, Sarah felt a sense of peace. The world was still vast and unpredictable, but with Buster by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. Her journey through grief had taught her that acceptance doesn't mean letting go. It means finding a way to carry the ones you love with you, even when they're no longer there in the flesh. In this quiet moment, Sarah understood that the porch was more than just a place. It was a bridge between past and present, a reminder of the enduring bond she shared with Buster. As she stood to go inside, she glanced down at him, a smile playing on her lips. "You're still with me, aren't you?" she whispered, knowing in her heart that the answer was yes. The sun continued to its ascent, casting a golden glow on the porch, where Sarah and Buster sat together, connected in a way that transcended reality. It was a new chapter, one filled with the promise of healing and the timeless love they shared. The air was crisp that morning, carrying the faint scent of impending autumn. Sarah stood at the kitchen window, her coffee warming her hands as she gazed out at the porch. Buster lay there, as he had every morning for weeks now, his form still and serene. She had long since stopped questioning the how or why, her mind too weary from the endless loop of disbelief and dread. Instead, she found herself acknowledging a strange sense of comfort in his presence. It wasn't the same as having him alive, she knew that. But there was something about his persistent shadow that felt like a bridge between the life they had shared and the loss she had endured. She had tried to bury him, to drive him away, to lock him out. but he had always returned. And with each return, something within her shifted, like the slow turning of a tide. She stepped out onto the porch, the wooden planks creaking under her feet. Buster didn't stir, of course, but she didn't expect him to. She sat down cross-legged beside him, running a hand over the familiar contours of his fur. It was cold to the touch, but she didn't mind. She had grown used to it, just as she had grown used to the quiet companionship he offered. "I miss you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm glad you're here." She had started talking to him a few weeks ago, at first out of desperation, then out of habit. Now it felt natural, like he was still a part of her life, in some inexplicable way. She told him about her day, her thoughts, her fears. She told him about the memories that surfaced unexpectedly, sharp and vivid, of the life they had shared before his passing. Those memories had become more frequent lately. At first they had been painful, slicing through her like a knife, but now they felt like a balm, a reminder of the bond they had shared. She could almost smell the earthy scent of the park where they had spent countless afternoons, feel the rough texture of his collar under her fingers, hear the deep rumble of his bark. These were not just memories. They were moments she could relive, if only for a brief time. She sat there for a while, the sun climbing higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. She didn't feel the same dread she had in the beginning, the same horror at the impossibility of it all. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance, a sense of understanding that she couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't that she had stopped grieving. The loss was still there, a heavy weight in her chest that she carried with her every day, but it was no longer paralyzing. She had started to rebuild her routine, to reconnect with the things she had neglected in her grief. She had started painting again. The brushstrokes were steady and sure as she brought color back into her world. She had started taking walks, the fresh air clearing her mind and lifting her spirits. And she had started to reach out to old friends, tentative at first, but finding comfort in their familiar voices and shared memories. Buster's presence didn't erase the pain, but it softened it, made it bearable. She had come to realize that the bond they shared wasn't broken by his death. It had changed, yes, but it was still there. A thread that connected them in ways she couldn't fully understand. She stood up after a while, brushing off her jeans. "I'll be right back," she said to Buster, as if he might respond. She went inside, poured herself another cup of coffee and brought it back out. The morning was peaceful, the only sound of the distant chirping of birds and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As she sat there, she felt a sense of clarity that she hadn't felt in months. She didn't need to know why Buster was still with her, or how. She didn't need to understand the mystery of his return, or the nature of reality that allowed it. What she needed was the connection, the sense of not being alone in her grief. And in that moment, she knew that she was okay. Not because the pain was gone, but because she had found a way to live with it. She had found a way to accept the inexplicable, to embrace the lingering presence of the life they had shared. She took a sip of her coffee, the warmth spreading through her as she sat there beside Buster. The world was still strange, still full of questions she couldn't answer. But in this quiet, peaceful moment, she felt a sense of resolution, a sense of understanding that didn't need words. It was enough that he was there, that she could sit with him, remember him, and find comfort in the bond that still tied them together. As the sun climbed higher, she stayed where she was, content in the silence, the stillness, and the enduring connection that had always been at the heart of their relationship. Cursed honeymoon. I never planned to kill him. I don't think people like me plan anything. Things just unwind inside us, like a clock too tightly wound, ready to spring apart at the slightest touch. It started with Mason's eyes. I know it sounds ridiculous, but they didn't look like him anymore. Not the soft, steady gaze that once calmed my panic attacks when I'd wake up screaming at 3 a.m., convinced someone was standing in our bedroom corner. No, these new eyes were hungry, predatory, as if something else was watching me from inside his skull, studying my movements like a cat studies a wounded bird. The change happened gradually, the way poison seeps through water. First, it was just moments, fleeting glimpses of something alien flickering behind his pupils. I told myself it was my imagination, talking trauma. My therapist, Dr. Chen, called it cognitive distortion, a fancy term for when your broken brain makes you see monsters where there are only shadows. But then I caught him whispering to our wedding photo at 3 a.m. I'd gotten up for water, padding barefoot across our hardwood floor, when I heard his voice drifting from the living room. Low, intimate, the way he used to whisper to me during our first months together. Following the sound, I found him kneeling before our mantelpiece, stroking the glass of our wedding portrait like he wanted to crawl inside it. She was so beautiful that day, he was saying, his finger tracing my face through the glass. So pure. So untouched. The way he said untouched made my skin crawl. There was hunger in it, possession. Like he was talking about something he owned rather than someone he loved. Mason? I whispered. He turned, and for just a moment, just a heartbeat, his face was completely blank. Empty, like someone had erased him from the inside out. Then his familiar smile returned, warm and apologetic. Sorry, babe. Couldn't sleep. It was just remembering. But his eyes never left mine. Never blink. And in the dim light from the street lamp outside, I could swear I saw something moving behind them. Something that writhed. That's when I called Talia. You should understand something about Talia Morrison. She isn't just a friend. She's the one who saved me when I nearly slit my wrists in the bathtub my junior year of college. Found me there, unconscious in pink water, and somehow talked the paramedics into not reporting it as a suicide attempt. She reads people the way others read books. And according to her, she reads spirits too. Talia comes from old mountain stock, the kind of Appalachian family that keeps mason jars of graveyard dirt on their windowsills, and knows which plants can stop a heart, or start one beating again. Her grandmother had been what the locals called a cunning woman, someone who could remove curses and cast them with equal skill. The gift, Talia claimed, had passed to her. When I described Mason's behavior, the midnight conversations with photographs, the way mirrors seemed to ripple when he walked past them, the sulfur smell that had begun following him everywhere, her face went pale. That's not your husband anymore, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We were sitting in her cramped apartment above the occult bookstore she managed, surrounded by dried herbs and crystals that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Something's taken root in him. A parasite. A hollow. I laughed at first. It was either laughing or screaming. Come on, Talia. You're talking about possession. Like demon possession. That's movie stuff. Is it? She leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. You've seen the signs, Eliza. You know something's wrong. The question is, are you going to ignore it until it's too late? She was right, of course. I had seen the signs. More than I'd admitted to her. More than I'd admitted to myself. The way all our houseplants had turned black overnight, their leaves crumbled to ash at the slightest touch. The morning I'd found our neighbor's German shepherd cowering in our backyard, having chewed through a chain-link fence to get away from our house. The dog wouldn't stop whimpering, wouldn't let anyone near it for hours. Then, there were the dreams. Not my dreams, his. I'd wake to find Mason thrashing beside me, speaking in a language that hurt my ears to hear. Ancient words that seemed to claw at the inside of my skull. When I shaked him awake, he'd look at me with those hungry eyes and smile. Bad dream, he'd say. But he never looked troubled. He looked satisfied. What do I do? I asked Talia, hating how small my voice sounded. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against the worn wooden table between us. When she finally spoke, her words were careful, measured. There's a way, she said. An old ritual. From the serpent path, a secret practice passed down through my family line. It's not what you think. Not murder. It's a release ritual. a way to separate the human soul from whatever's wearing it like a suit. And what happens to Mason? If there's still something of him left in there, the ritual will free him. Send his soul on to whatever comes next. She paused, her eyes meeting mine. What's left after that is just meat. Just a shell. And shells, well, shells can't survive without what was living inside them. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. I wanted to run, to pretend this conversation had never happened. But I also wanted Mason back. The real Mason, the one who'd held me through panic attacks and made me believe I was worth loving. How? I whispered. Talia smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Leave that to me. The plan took shape over the following weeks. Mason had been talking about wanting to take a hiking trip. Just the two of us, he said, somewhere remote where we could reconnect. The timing felt too perfect to be coincidence, like whatever was inside him was pushing us towards some predetermined end. Talia suggested the Cascade Range, a popular hiking destination with enough foot traffic to make our presence unremarkable, but remote enough for privacy. She'd done her research, she said. There were places up there where the veil between worlds was thin, where rituals could be performed without interference from the natural order. You won't be alone, she assured me. I have someone who can help. Someone who understands the old ways. That someone turned out to be Curtis Blackwood, a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a fever dream. Tall and gaunt, with prematurely white hair and fingers that were always cold to the touch. He claimed to be a wildlife photographer, carried professional-looking camera equipment, and had references that checked out when Mason inevitably Googled him. What Mason couldn't see were the things that made my skin crawl. The way Curtis moved too quietly, like he was floating just above the ground. The salt he kept in small pouches in every pocket. The tattoo that covered his entire back, a massive tree with human skulls hanging from its branches like fruit. And his smell. Beneath the typical hiker's blend of sweat and sunscreen, Curtis smelled like something that had been buried and dug up again. He's not entirely human, Talia explained when I expressed my concerns. His grandmother was something else. Mountain folk. The kind that makes deals with things that live in the deep woods. But that's what makes him perfect for this. He can see what normal people can't. And he can do what normal people won't. 3 days before our planned departure, Talia gave me the charm. It was a bone pendant strung on what looked like animal sinew, carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change whenever I wasn't looking directly at them. Wear this during the ritual, she instructed. It will protect you from the worst of what happens when something like that dies. But remember, if he bleeds, don't look at his eyes. Don't let him see you watching, or he'll take something from you on the way out. What kind of something? The kind you can't get back. I slipped the pendant over my head, feeling it settles against my chest like a piece of ice. It was warm to touch, but somehow it made me feel colder. There's one more thing, Talia continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. After it's done, after the thing wearing Mason's face is dead, you need to burn something personal of his. Something he treasured. It will help ensure his soul finds its way to whatever comes next. I nodded, thinking immediately of the pocket watch his grandfather had given him. Mason carried it everywhere, checking it obsessively even though it had stopped working years ago. And Talia? After it's over. Will you be there? Will you help me? I can't, she said quickly. The ritual works better if the caster isn't present. Too much spiritual energy in one place can attract attention. You'll be on your own until it's finished. The finality in her voice should have been my first warning, but I was too desperate, too tired of living with the thing that wore my husband's face, to listen to my instincts. Mason was thrilled about the trip, more animated than I'd seen him in months. He spent hours poring over trail maps, researching the best spots for photography, planning our route with the obsessive attention to detail that had once made him such a successful architect. This is exactly what we need, he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I packed our gear. Just us. No distractions. No work. No therapy appointments. Just you and me in the wilderness. The way he said just you and me made the bone pendant against my chest grow warm, like it was reacting to something in his voice, some underlying threat I couldn't consciously detect. Curtis met us at the trailhead early Saturday morning, looking every inch the professional photographer in his expensive outdoor gear. Mason took to him immediately, bonding over shared stories of hiking adventures and close encounters with wildlife. I found their easy camaraderie disturbing, like watching a snake charm a mouse. The hike itself was beautiful. The Cascade Range in late summer is a cathedral of green, with towering Douglas firs and moss-covered rocks that seem to glow in the filtered sunlight. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed it, but every step took us farther from civilization, farther from help, closer to whatever Talia had planned. Curtis knew exactly where we were going, though he pretended to consult his GPS and trail maps regularly. He guided us along increasingly narrow paths, past warning signs about unstable terrain and dangerous drop-offs. Mason followed eagerly, chattering about the incredible photo opportunities and the rush of being so far from the modern world. "There's something pure about places like this," he said as we climbed higher into the mountains. "Something that strips away all the bullshit and leaves you with just the essentials." I noticed he has used the word pure a lot lately, always with that same hungry inflection, like he was tasting something delicious. We reached the cliff by sunset. It was a spectacular viewpoint, with a sheer drop of several hundred feet into a tree-lined valley below. The kind of place that would be crawling with tourists during peak season, but was now completely deserted. "Perfect," Curtis murmured, but he wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at Mason. Mason stood at the edge, arms spread wide, breathing deeply of the mountain air. "God, you can see forever from up here," he said. "Makes you feel like you're on top of the world, like you could just step off and fly." That's when I saw it, his shadow on the rocks beside him. It was wrong. Where Mason's shadow should have been the silhouette of a man with outstretched arms, instead there was something else. Something with too many limbs, something that moved independently of Mason's body. The bone pendant was burning against my chest now, so hot I could feel it through my shirt. "Mason," I called softly, "come away from the edge." He turned to look at me, and for just a moment his face was completely slack, empty. Then his familiar smile returned, but it was wrong too. Too wide, showing too many teeth. "Don't worry, babe," he said, walking toward me with fluid, predatory grace. "I'm not going anywhere. We're going to be together forever, remember? Till death do us part." He reached for me and I stepped back instinctively. His hands were ice cold. "Forever," he repeated, and this time his voice had an echo to it, like there were multiple voices speaking in unison. That's when Curtis moved. Curtis didn't wait for my signal. Maybe there was no signal planned. Maybe this had always been about timing, about waiting for the right moment when the thing inside Mason was distracted, vulnerable. He came up behind Mason with a rock the size of a softball, bringing it down the back of his skull with enough force to drop a bull. Mason staggered but didn't fall. Instead, he turned around slowly, blood streaming down his neck, and smiled at Curtis with genuine amusement. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" he asked, his voice now clearly not his own. It was deeper, older, with an accent I couldn't place. "Did you think I wouldn't know what you were planning?" Curtis tried to swing again, but Mason caught his wrist with inhuman speed. The sound of bones breaking was audible even over the wind. "The little witch thought she was so clever," Mason continued, his grip tightening until Curtis screamed, "sending her pet monster to do her dirty work. But I've been watching, waiting, learning." He turned those hungry eyes on me. "Oh, my dear wife, my precious, damaged little bird, did you really think you could kill me? After everything I've done for you? After all the love I've shown you?" The thing wearing Mason's face began to laugh, and the sound was like breaking glass. Curtis was on his knees now, his arm bent at an impossible angle, whimpering like a wounded animal. "You want to know the truth?" Mason asked, his attention fixed on me. "Your precious Mason invited me in, begged me to take him. He was so tired of your broken mind, your endless neediness, your pathetic attempts at suicide. He wanted out, wanted to be free of you. So I gave him what he wanted." "You're lying," I whispered. But even as I said it, I could feel the truth of his words settling into my bones like poison. "Am I?" "Think about it, Eliza. When did the changes start? Right after your last attempt, wasn't it? Right after you swallowed that bottle of pills and made him pump your stomach and hold your hair while you vomited up the charcoal? He realized then that you were never going to get better. Never going to be the woman he thought he was marrying." Each word was a knife, cut deeper than the last. Because I remembered that night. Remembered the look in Mason's eyes when he found me unconscious on our bathroom floor. Not fear, or love, or concern. Relief. Like he'd been waiting for me to finally do it right. So, he made a deal. The thing continued. His body for his freedom. I get a vessel, and he gets to watch from the inside while I clean up his mess. Starting with you. But the ritual. There is no ritual, you stupid girl. There never was. The little witch lied to you. Used your desperation to get what she really wanted. His smile widened impossibly. A sacrifice. A blood offering to powers much older and hungrier than I am. That's when I understood. The remote location. Curtis's inhuman abilities. Talia's refusal to come with us. This had never been about saving Mason or exorcising a demon. This had been about feeding something else entirely. Something that required violence and betrayal, and the kind of pain that could only come from destroying someone's last hope. The bone pendant was searing my chest now, and I could smell burning flesh. My burning flesh. I reached up to tear it off, but it wouldn't budge. The sinew cord had somehow fused with my skin. "Oh, that little trinket?" Mason laughed. "That's not protection, my dear. That's a beacon. A dinner bell. And you've been ringing it this whole time." The shadows around us began to move independently of their sources. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. And from somewhere far below us, from the depths of the valley, came an answering call. Something vast and hungry, awakening to the scent of fresh offerings. Curtis made a sound like a dying animal. When I looked at him, I saw why. His skin was peeling away in long strips, revealing something underneath that definitely wasn't human. Something with too many joints and eyes that reflected light like a cat. "You see," Mason said conversationally, "Curtis isn't just Talia's pet monster. He's her breeding partner. Half human, half something that should have stayed in the deep woods. And when he dies here, in this sacred place, his mixed blood will open a door that's been sealed for centuries." The shadows were taking shape now, forming into things that hurt to look at directly. Things with reaching claws and mouths full of needle teeth. The wind carried voices, not words, exactly, but something that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the primitive, screaming part of the brain. "And you, my precious wife, will be the final ingredient. The betrayed innocent. The loving victim. Your death will complete the ritual and bring my true masters through." He reached for me with Mason's hands, and I could see the real Mason then, trapped somewhere behind those hungry eyes. Could see him screaming, begging, trying to warn me. That's when something inside me snapped. I've never been a fighter. My whole life I've been the victim, the broken one, the girl who needed saving. But standing there on that cliff, watching the thing that had eaten my husband reach for me with blood-slicked fingers, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Rage. Pure, white-hot fury that burned away everything else. The fear, desperation, the crushing weight of my own damaged psyche. For the first time in my life, I wasn't thinking about dying. I was thinking about killing. The bone pendant was still burning against my chest, but now the pain felt different. Not like torture, but like power. like something inside me was finally waking up after years of sleep. I grabbed the pendant and pulled. The sinew cord snapped like thread, and the carved bone came away in my palm. But instead of relief, I felt more. Like the pendant had been holding something back, keeping it contained. Interesting, Mason said, tilting his head like a curious animal. The little witch didn't tell you everything, did she? That's when I remembered what Talia had said about her family line. About gifts that passed from generation to generation. About cunning women who could remove curses and cast them with equal skill. Your grandmother, I whispered, the pieces falling into place. She wasn't just a friend of Talia's family. She was part of it. Mason's smile faltered for the first time. Impossible. We checked your lineage. There's no trace of... Because she hid it, I said, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. Because she married a normal man and moved away from the mountains and never taught her children about the old ways. But the blood remembers, doesn't it? The blood always remembers. The pendant in my hand was glowing now, casting red light across the darkening landscape. The shadows that had been creeping closer stopped, as if suddenly uncertain. You can't, Mason said, but his voice is smaller now, less confident. You don't know how. You don't have the training. Maybe not, I agreed. But I have something else. I have rage, and I have you. I lunged forward, faster than I'd ever moved in my life, and pressed the burning pendant against Mason's forehead. He screamed, not with Mason's voice, but with something else. Something that sounded like metal scraping against stone. The world exploded into light and sound and pain. I felt something vast and angry tear through me, using my body as a conduit, my blood as a weapon. The thing wearing Mason's face fought back, but it was too late. The door it had opened could be forced to swing both ways. If you want a sacrifice, I screamed over the howling wind, then take the one who betrayed first. The shadows rushed forward, but they didn't reach for me. They reached for Mason, for the thing inside him that had made the first deal, broken the first trust. I felt it being torn out of him, piece by piece, screaming as if it was dragged back into whatever hell it had crawled out of. Curtis was gone. Not dead gone, like he'd never existed at all. And Mason collapsed like a marionette with cut strings. When I knelt beside him, his eyes were his own again. Confused, frightened, but human. Eliza? He whispered. What happened? Where are we? I wanted to tell him everything. About the thing that had been wearing his face. About Talia's betrayal. About the ritual that had nearly cost us both our souls. But looking at his bewildered, innocent expression, I realized he didn't remember any of it. The possession, the months of psychological torture, the hunger in his eyes, it was all gone, wiped clean. You fell, I said instead. Hit your head. But you're okay now. He smiled at me with such pure love that I almost started crying. This was my Mason, the real one, the one I'd married, the one I'd nearly lost to something that should have stayed buried. I love you, he said. I love you too. And for the first time in months, I meant it. We made it down the mountain just as the sun was setting. Mason's head injury was real enough, a concussion that left him dizzy and nauseous, but nothing that wouldn't heal. The emergency room doctor said he was lucky. A fall like that could easily have been fatal. If only she knew. The official story was simple. Mason slipped on loose rocks near the cliff edge, hit his head, and nearly fell. I managed to pull him back and get him safe. Curtis, the photographer who'd been with us, must have taken a different trail down. We never saw him again. No one questioned it. No one had any reason to. We were just another couple who'd had a hiking accident. Nothing more. But I knew the truth. And in the weeks that followed, I began to understand the real price of what I'd done. The first sign was the dreams. Not nightmares I could have handled. These were visions. Glimpses of things that were happening in real time, miles away. I saw Talia in her apartment above the occult shop, screaming as shadows peeled away from the walls and reached for her with grasping claws. I saw her torn apart, piece by piece, payment for her betrayal. I should have felt guilty, should have tried to warn her, or at least felt some regret for her suffering. Instead, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She had tried to use me, to sacrifice me and Mason for her own dark purposes. She deserved what she got. That absence of guilt should have scared me. But it didn't. Nothing much scared me anymore. The second sign was the way animals reacted to me. Dogs would whimper and hide when I passed. Cats would hiss and flee. Even insects seemed to avoid me, as if they could sense something predatory in my presence. The third sign was Mason himself. He'd recovered completely from his concussion, but sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with a strange expression. Not fear, exactly, but uncertainty. Like he was trying to remember something important that kept slipping away. "Do you ever feel like we're missing something?" he asked me one evening as we sat on our couch, watching television. "Like there's something we should remember but can't." "What kind of something?" "I don't know. It's just, sometimes I look at you and I get this feeling. Like you're not the same person I married. Like you're more." He was right, of course. I wasn't the same person. The broken, suicidal girl who'd let herself be manipulated by a mountain witch was gone. In her place there was something harder, colder, more purposeful. Something that could kill without hesitation and sleep soundly afterward. "People change," I said. "Trauma changes us. But do they change this much?" I turned to look at him, and for just a moment, I let him see what I'd become. Let him glimpse the power that now flowed through my veins like liquid fire, the darkness that had awakened when I'd torn the pendant from my throat. He went very still, his face pale in the flickering light from the television. "Eliza?" "I'm still me," I said softly. "Just better." He didn't ask any more questions after that. Epilogue: The Inheritance. 6 months later, I received a package in the mail. No return address, just my name written in spidery handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a letter written on yellow paper. "Dear Eliza, if you're reading this, then the blood has awakened, and you've claimed your inheritance. I am Sarah Morrison, your great-grandmother, though you've never heard my name spoken aloud. I died long before you were born, but I've been watching over our family line, waiting for the power to manifest in a new generation. My granddaughter, the one you knew as Talia, was a disappointment. She had the sight but not the strength, the knowledge but not the wisdom. She used our family's gifts for petty revenge and personal gain, never understanding that power without purpose is just destruction wearing a prettier face. You, however, have proven yourself worthy. You faced betrayal with strength, corruption with purity of purpose, and evil with righteous anger. The power that flows through you now is your birthright, passed down through generations of cunning women who kept the balance between light and dark. Use it wisely. The world is full of predators like the thing that wore your husband's face, full of corruptors like my failed granddaughter. Someone must stand against them. Someone must be the monster that monsters fear. The journal contains everything you need to know. Spells, rituals, protections, and binding. But remember, every use of power demands payment. Make sure you're willing to pay the price before you act. Welcome to the family, child. Make us proud. Sarah Morrison. Last of the Serpent Path. I burned the letter but kept the journal. Mason never asked about it, though I sometimes caught him looking at it with that same uncertain expression he wore when he looked at me. That was fine. There were some things he was better off not knowing. Besides, I had work to do. The world was full of darkness, full of things that preyed on the innocent and the broken. And now I had the power to do something about it. The universe demands balance. For every evil act, there must be punishment. For every predator, there must be something worse. And sometimes, just sometimes, the monster is exactly what the world needs. They say that when you stare into the abyss, The abyss stares back. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes, if you stare long enough and hard enough, you realize you were always part of the darkness yourself. If you ever feel the pull of power, the whisper of abilities that could solve all your problems with a word or a gesture, remember this: every gift comes with a price. Every power demands payment. And the universe always collects its debts. Choose carefully, because once you've paid the price, once you've accepted what you are, there's no going back to who you used to be. The only question is, can you live with what you've become?
The Mirror's Whisper. I never believed in curses until I moved into the cottage in rural Maine. The realtor, Mrs. Henderson, had been unusually eager to close the deal quickly. Too quickly, I realize now. She'd mentioned the previous tenant, Elena Rodriguez, had left suddenly for personal reasons, but the way her eyes darted away when she said it should have been my first warning. The cottage sat at the end of a winding dirt road, surrounded by thick pine woods that seemed to swallow sound. It was perfect for someone like me, a freelance writer seeking isolation after my messy divorce from Marcus. I'd been struggling with what my therapist called adjustment disorder with depressed mood, but I preferred to think of it as finally seeing the world clearly after years of Marcus's gaslighting. The first week passed peacefully. I set up my writing space in the living room, facing away from the large antique mirror that dominated the far wall. Something about that mirror unsettled me. Its ornate silver frame was tarnished black in places, and the glass seemed darker than it should be, like looking into deep water rather than at your reflection. It was on the 8th night that I first heard the knocking. I'd been writing late, absorbed in a true crime article about missing persons in rural areas, when a soft but persistent knock came from somewhere inside the house. Not the front door. I checked that immediately. The sound seemed to come from the walls themselves, rhythmic and deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. I stood in the living room listening, my heart hammering against my ribs. The knocking stopped. In the sudden silence, I caught my reflection in the antique mirror and froze. For just a moment, it looked like someone else was standing behind me, a woman with dark hair and hollow eyes. I spun around, but the room was empty. Stress, I whispered to myself, repeating Dr. Morgan's words about how trauma can manifest in visual disturbances. Just stress. But the knocking returned the next night, and the next. By the 4th night, I was beginning to question my sanity. The knocking always started at 2:17 a.m. I'd started checking the clock obsessively. It would last exactly 7 minutes, then stop abruptly. During those 7 minutes, the temperature in the room would drop noticeably, and that cursed mirror would seem to ripple like disturbed water. I called Mrs. Henderson, demanding answers about the previous tenant. Her voice turned cold and professional. Elena Rodriguez left no forwarding address. She abandoned the lease without notice. That's all I can tell you. But something in her tone suggested there was more. Much more. I decided to visit the local library in town, a 40-minute drive through winding mountain roads. The librarian, an elderly man named Thomas Pike, recognized the address immediately when I mentioned it. "Oh, that place," he said, his face darkening. "You're living in the Rodriguez house now?" Elena was a sweet girl, came from a big Mexican family. Very traditional, very superstitious. She'd been trying to have a baby for years with her husband, Carlos. He paused, glancing around the empty library before continuing in a whisper. She got desperate. Started visiting old Maria Santos up in the hills. Everyone knows Maria practices witchcraft, the old Mexican folk magic. Elena was convinced someone had cursed her womb. My skin prickled. What happened? Maria gave her something. A ritual to perform with mirrors and candles. Said it would break any curse and ensure pregnancy. Thomas's eyes grew distant. Elena performed it in that big mirror in the living room. The one that came with the house belonged to the original owner, a woman named Constance Blackwood, who died in the 1940s. And Elena got pregnant. Twins. But something went wrong during the birth. Both babies were stillborn, and Elena, she had what the doctors called a complete psychotic break. Postpartum psychosis, they said. She became convinced that her dead babies were trapped in the mirror, calling to her. The room felt suddenly cold. What happened to her? Thomas shook his head sadly. Carlos found her 3 months later, standing in front of that mirror with a knife, talking to someone who wasn't there. She'd been cutting herself small cuts all over her arms. Said she had to feed the mirror to free her babies. Carlos had her committed to the state hospital. That night, I couldn't sleep. The knocking came at 2:17 a.m. as always, but this time I forced myself to watch the mirror during those 7 minutes. What I saw made my blood turn to ice. The reflection showed not my living room, but a different room, the same room, but somehow wrong. In this mirror world, candles burned in a circle on the floor. A woman knelt in the center, her back to me, long dark hair cascading down her shoulders. She was holding something small and still. The woman turned slightly and I saw Elena's face, gaunt, eyes black with grief and madness. Her lips moved, forming words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. Help me. Help them. I stumbled backward, knocking over my coffee table. When I looked again, the mirror showed only my own terrified reflection. But something had changed. In the corner of the reflection, barely visible, were two small shadows that hadn't been there before. Over the next few days, the activity escalated. The knocking came at random hours now, sometimes lasting minutes, sometimes hours. Electronics would malfunction. My laptop would type words I hadn't written. Always the same phrase, let us out, let us out, let us out, let us out, let us out. My phone would dial numbers on its own, always the same number. When I finally answered, all I heard was the sound of crying babies. I researched Constance Blackwood, the mirror's original owner. She'd been a spiritualist in the 1920s and 30s, hosting sessions and claiming to communicate with the dead. She died alone in the cottage, found weeks later in front of the very same mirror. The autopsy mentioned numerous small cuts on her arms and hands. The mirror wasn't just reflecting, it was collecting. Sleep became impossible. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and I began to see things that couldn't be there. Elena would appear in my peripheral vision, always near the mirror, sometimes holding the shadowy forms of her stillborn children. She'd mouth words at me. Break it. Break the cycle. But breaking the mirror felt wrong, dangerous. What if it freed whatever was trapped inside? What if it made things worse? I had tried covering the mirror with sheets, but they would be torn down by morning. I tried leaving the house, but my car wouldn't start. It was as if the mirror, or whatever lived in it, wouldn't let me go. That's when I remembered something Thomas had mentioned. Maria Santos, the curandera, who'd given Elena the ritual. If anyone could help me understand what was happening, it would be her. I found Maria's cabin after 2 hours of searching the mountain roads. She was ancient and bent, with eyes like a black obsidian that seemed to see right through me. Before I could speak, she nodded slowly. "You live in the house with the hungry mirror," she said in accented English. "Elena came to me desperate for children. I gave her what she asked for, but I warned her, magic always demands payment. What did you do?" "I taught her the twin mirrors ritual. It opens a door between our world and the shadow world where lost souls wait. The desperate mother calls her unborn children, and sometimes, something answers." My stomach clenched, but the babies were still born. Maria's weathered face grew grim. "No, 100. The babies died because something else took their place in Elena's womb. Something hungry and dark that had been waiting in the mirror world. Elena birthed shadows, and shadows cannot live in our world. Then what's in the mirror now? Elena's grief, her madness, her desperate love, and the shadow things that fed on it. The mirror was already cursed. Constance Blackwood saw that. Each desperate soul who uses it adds to its power, feeds its hunger. How do I stop it? Maria studied for me for a long time. You can't break the mirror. That would free everything trapped inside. But you can choose. Feed it with your own desperation, your own grief over your failed marriage, your broken dreams, or starve it. How do I starve it? Stop looking. Stop listening. Accept that some doors should never be opened, and some griefs must be carried alone. But it was too late for simple solutions. That night I woke to find Elena standing at the foot of my bed. She was clearer now, more solid. Her arms were covered in small cuts that wept dark blood, and she cradled two writhing shadows against her chest. He cursed me, she whispered, her voice like wind through dead leaves. My husband's mother. She never wanted grandchildren from a Mexican woman. She cursed my womb with the evil eye. I sat up slowly, trying not to show fear. Elena, you're dead. This isn't real. The babies are hungry, she continued, ignoring me. They need to be born properly. They need a mother who can carry them into the light. Understanding hit me like ice water. The mirror hadn't just collected Elena's grief. It had collected her desperate need to complete the birth ritual. And now it wanted to use me. You're divorced, Elena said, moving closer. Broken. Desperate for purpose. Like I was. The mirror knows your pain. She was right. Despite my rational mind, part of me was drawn to the idea of purpose, of being needed. Marcus had spent years convincing me I was worthless, that no one would ever truly need me. The placebo effect of feeling wanted was intoxicating, but I also recognized the manipulation. This was nocebo magic, creating harm through belief and fear. Elena wasn't offering salvation. She was offering damnation dressed as purpose. No, I said firmly. I won't feed your delusion. Elena's face contorted with rage. Then you'll take my place. The mirror is hungry and it will be fed. The room exploded into chaos. The mirror began to pulse with dark light, and I could hear the sound of crying babies growing louder. Shadows poured from the mirror's surface like black water, reaching for me with grasping fingers. I ran. I made it to my car and drove through the night, not stopping until I reached the city. I stayed in a hotel for 3 days, trying to convince myself it was over. But on the 4th night, I woke to find a small cut on my arm, a thin line that hadn't been there before. In the bathroom mirror, Elena smiled back at me. The mirror had marked me. Distance meant nothing now. I returned to the cottage with a can of gasoline and a plan. If I couldn't break the mirror without releasing its contents, maybe I could destroy the whole house, trap everything inside the flames. But when I arrived, I found I wasn't alone. Mrs. Henderson stood in the living room, staring into the mirror with tears streaming down her face. She was holding a knife, making small cuts on her arms while whispering to her reflection. Mrs. Henderson? She turned to me with wild eyes. She's been calling to me for weeks, ever since you moved in. She says she can bring him back, my son who died in Afghanistan. She says the mirror can reach across any distance, even death. I understood then. The mirror didn't just feed on one person's grief. It called to anyone nearby who carried deep loss. Mrs. Henderson had been its true target all along. I was just the catalyst, the one who'd awakened its hunger with my own pain. It's not real, I said gently. It's a trap. But Mrs. Henderson was too far gone, lost in the nocebo effect of her own desperate hope. She raised the knife to make another cut, and I knew I had to act. I tackled her and we struggled for the knife. In the chaos, it clattered across the floor toward the mirror. As it hit the glass, the surface rippled, and for a moment I saw beyond the reflection into the shadow world, where Elena waited with her hungry children, and Mrs. Henderson's son stood with hollow eyes and reaching hands. "Break it," Elena whispered from the mirror. "Let us all be free." But I finally understood the truth. Breaking the mirror wouldn't free the trapped souls. It would free the shadows that had taken their forms. Elena wasn't Elena anymore, just grief and madness wearing her face. The babies weren't babies, just hungry darkness seeking new vessels. I helped Mrs. Henderson to her feet and led her outside. Then I called the authorities, reported a gas leak, and waited as they evacuated the area. 3 hours later, the cottage was a smoking ruin. But sometimes, late at night in my new apartment across the country, I catch glimpses of Elena in mirrors. She's patient now, no longer desperate. She knows that grief travels, that pain follows us wherever we go. And sometimes, when I'm feeling particularly low, particularly broken, I find small cuts on my arms that I don't remember making. The mirror is gone, but the hunger remains. It's in every reflective surface now, waiting for the right moment of weakness, the perfect combination of desperation and need. I've learned to avoid mirrors when I'm sad. I've learned that some doors once opened can never be fully closed. But late at night, when sleep eludes me and the shadows seem too deep, I sometimes wonder, what if Elena was telling the truth? What if she really could bring back what we've lost? What if all it takes is one small cut, one moment of faith in the darkness? The knife sits in my kitchen drawer, and every night, the temptation grows a little stronger. After all, we all need to believe in something, even if that something is hungry for our souls.